Father called me worthless, praised my brother as his golden child. Now my revenge is about to begin. Since the narrative finally came to an end and retribution was meted out cold, I, 25M, feel compelled to tell it. While I was treated as though I had no value, my 20-meter brother was always our father's golden child. This isn't just your average family partiality. It was systematic, harsh, and had a lasting impact on my entire youth. From the outside, my life appeared to be ideal as I grew up in a California suburban home that was apparently upper middle class. We appeared to be the perfect American family. Mom was a loving presence, Dad worked in finance, and we lived in a wonderful house. However, things were quite different behind closed doors. My father was hardly there in my life from the time I can remember. On weekends, he would occasionally be there in person, but he was never there for me emotionally. He always used work as an excuse, citing late-night calls, crucial clients, and interminable meetings. However, Dad suddenly had all the time in the world 5 years later when my brother was born. He went from being an absent parent to the most dedicated father in the world, not to me though, like someone flipping a switch. At the age of 8 I became aware of computers. Mom thought I might like learning about the old PC she brought home from her office. It was love at first sight, and she was correct. As other children engaged in sports or video games, I found the workings of computers to be fascinating. After spending hours attempting to comprehend code and write simple programs, I began learning basic programming from library books. My mother recognized my enthusiasm. Although she wasn't tech-savvy herself, she could see how my eyes brightened when I discussed my most recent endeavors. She would spend hours sitting with me, asking me questions and pushing me to give straightforward explanations. "You're teaching me too," she would smile and remark. Some of my most treasured recollections are of the times when we shared my passion for technology. My fascination with computers, however, was viewed by my father as a personal failure, his inability to raise a normal son. "Real men play sports," he would say, his dissatisfaction evident in his voice. "Stop wasting time with those computer games." He never bothered to learn the difference between Python and JavaScript, which I was educating myself, and they weren't games. When I tried to explain what I was really doing, I was received with waves of disdain or eye rolls. He handled my brother in a glaringly painful contrast. Dad instantly became super dad when my brother, who was 6 years old at the time, expressed an interest in football. He attended every practice, coached his team, and purchased the greatest gear. Dad spent hours instructing my brother in perfect throwing technique, turning our backyard into a training ground. I would sit by myself with my computer in my room, listening to their bonding and laughter. My mom did her utmost to maintain equilibrium. She was aware of the situation and made every effort to compensate for Dad's partiality. She helped me set up for scientific fairs, attended my computer club meetings, and always made sure to acknowledge my accomplishments, even if Dad didn't. When she said, "You're special in your own way. Don't let anyone make you feel less than you are." I recall a specific night when I was 12 years old. I had just completed my first actual program, a straightforward game that I had written myself. I couldn't wait to share it with someone. I went to find Dad because Mom was working late. As usual, he and my brother were practicing football in the backyard. Before attempting to grab his attention, I patiently waited for about an hour. "May I show you something, Dad? I created a game." He didn't give me a glance. "Not right now. We're busy, don't you see? This is significant. This weekend, your brother has a game." Everything became crystal clear in that moment. He would never value my accomplishments enough. That night I returned to my room and sobbed. However, I also decided that I would succeed for Mom and myself, not for him. Then my life's darkest day arrived. My mother unexpectedly died of an aneurysm when I was 13. She was there one day to make breakfast and inquire about my most recent coding project, and then she left. Although the loss was terrible, the aftermath was even worse. Dad's partiality grew obvious and unfettered in the absence of Mom's balanced influence. I realized my place in the family in the days after Mom's passing. Dad used athletics as a way to cope with his loss and threw himself fully into my brother's life. He was present at every school function, practice, and football game. In the meantime, I worked through my grief by myself in my room, seeking comfort in writing increasingly intricate programs in an effort to produce something that would please Mom. I can still clearly recall my first significant accomplishment following Mom's passing. I took first place in the state computer science fair when I was 14 years old. According to the teacher, I had developed a program that could assist in organizing the school library system. I had put a note on Dad's refrigerator 3 weeks before the fair, which was on a Saturday. I spent the entire day at the fair waiting, taking pictures, congratulating and watching the parents of other children arrive and depart. I gazed up in hope each time the door opened, but he never appeared. I learned later that night that he had attended my brother's football practice, which was simply a regular session and not even a game. He hardly looked at my blue ribbon when I brought it home. After saying, "That's nice," he returned to his task of assisting my brother with his homework. All the way through high school, the trend persisted. Dad's pride and delight was my brother, who was the best quarterback. His most recent game or his chances of receiving a college sports scholarship were the topic of every dinner talk. As I pushed food around my plate, I would sit there listening to Dad talk about how my brother will one day succeed as a businessman and follow in his footsteps. I got snide murmurs or outright interruptions whenever I tried to discuss my accomplishments in programming contests or the websites I was creating for nearby companies. Dad would respond, "That's enough about computers," and then return the focus to my brother's most recent touchdown. I developed the ability to keep my head down, concentrate on my task, and make plans for the future. I was aware that I would need to set my own terms for success. At 16, I began working as a freelance programmer, creating websites for local small businesses. Since I knew I would need the money for college, I saved every penny. With its assortment of computer components and coding books, my room became a haven. I was wasting my talent, Dad would murmur as he passed, shaking his head. I learned more than simply programming via my freelance business. I gained knowledge of project management, client relations, and business. I had a strong portfolio and a developing reputation in our local business community by my junior year of high school. I was earning a respectable income for a youngster, and some customers even began recommending me to others. I was reminded of Mom by a local bookshop owner who was one of my regular customers. She truly wanted to know what I was doing, therefore she would constantly inquire about my most recent efforts. She said she had never seen someone so young with such a good work ethic and even offered to write me a letter of recommendation for college. My senior year of high school was the true turning moment. A number of renowned computer science schools, including one at a Silicon Valley tech school, had accepted me. Because of my stellar marks, I was even awarded a partial scholarship. However, I still required tuition assistance. I made a thorough presentation for Dad, showcasing my scholarship offers, admission letters, and business strategy outlining how I will continue to support my school through freelancing. I even supplied data regarding possible return on investment and employment opportunities in technology. I prepared for weeks in the hopes that he would eventually be persuaded by a rational, practical approach. Less than 5 minutes passed throughout the meeting. He remarked, "I'm not wasting money on your computer hobby," without even glancing at my meticulously crafted pages. "Your brother has a lot of promise. That money is necessary for his upcoming business degree." My brother didn't care that he was having academic difficulties. Dad believed that I could do no right and my brother could do no wrong. I was unable to contain myself any longer. My voice trembled as I added, "Mom would have supported me. She believed in me." His expression stiffened. "She isn't present, is she? We also do things my way while you're living with me. Instead of wasting time playing with computers, your brother will pursue a legitimate career." I gave my aunt, Mom's sister, a call that evening. After Mom passed away, she continued to stay in touch, occasionally checking in and sending me birthday cards. She remained silent for a while after I explained what had happened. "Your mother would be very proud of you," she continued. "I'll see what I can accomplish." My aunt didn't have much money. Although she was a high school teacher, she ended up being my savior. She offered to contribute as much of her savings as she could. She informed other friends and family members about my circumstances and my potential. With the combined assistance of several of Mom's old acquaintances and my own freelancing earnings, I was able to accumulate enough money for my first year of college. I was determined to make it work, even if it meant taking out loans and working part-time. Dad hardly lifted his eyes from his newspaper on the day I departed for college. My brother didn't say goodbye since he was too preoccupied with football practice. The only person who came to say goodbye was my aunt, who gave me a big hug and gave me an envelope containing some additional cash she had saved. College was enlightening. I was surrounded by people who recognized and valued my love of technology for the first time in my life. My aptitude for programming, which had been disregarded at home, was appreciated. My work ethic and inventiveness were commended by my professors. I poured myself into my education, continuing to work as a freelancer and keep my scholarships. I began creating what would eventually be my key to success during my junior year. It was more than just another software. It was a fix for a prevalent issue I had observed while working as an intern at a number of IT firms. During a late-night coding session, I conceived the concept and felt it had promise right away. I spent every free moment I had working on it, including weekends, evenings, and in between classes. I could sense that this was different from my roommate, who thought I was crazy because I was continuously coding and not sleeping. This was my future, not simply another project. In the midst of all of this, I would occasionally hear Dad say, "Your computer hobby will never amount to anything." The words that had once caused me such pain now strengthened my resolve. I was getting closer to disproving his shadow with each line of code I produced. During my time in college, I maintained contact with my aunt. Like Mom, she was my biggest supporter and always had faith in me. She understood my passion even though she didn't grasp the technical aspects of my app idea when I told her about it. The statement, "You sound just like your mother," when she got excited about something, brought tears to my eyes. Dad and my brother did not attend the ceremony, but I graduated with honors. But there was my aunt looking proud. Like Mom, she had seen my ability early on. There was no more obvious contrast between her sincere encouragement and my father's rejection. If Dad had cared to find out, I would have caused him a heart attack for the risk I took after graduation. In order to concentrate on creating my software, I declined multiple lucrative employment offers. I worked 18-hour days, ate ramen, and lived in a small studio apartment. My aunt still had faith in me, and she would sometimes send encouraging comments and care packages. In the meantime, I was informed of my brother's difficulties in his business program through family rumors spread by my aunt. To prevent him from dropping out, Dad had to pay tutors and make large payments. Nevertheless, Dad believed that my brother had genuine potential and that my tech job was merely a passing phase that would ultimately fail. They had no idea how drastically things will alter throughout my time. But with the release of my app and the beginning of my company's explosive growth, that's where the next update starts. The events that followed would serve as the ideal pretext for the most fulfilling form of retaliation against their years of contempt and rejection. I'll reserve those specifics for updates, but I'm still in awe of how everything worked out. Karma, let's say, has a way of coming full circle, and sometimes the best form of retaliation is enormous success, particularly if you can use that success to impart some very specific lessons to those who questioned you. The upcoming update will describe how Dad's golden child's true potential resulted in a completely different outcome and how my useless computer pastime became a multi-million-dollar business. Keep an eye out. I continue to smile at the satisfaction of what transpired afterward. Update 1. Since my last post, it's been quite the journey. Many of you requested information about how my app really took off, so here is the whole tale of how my useless pastime became a multi-million-dollar business. I found the cheapest apartment in Silicon Valley after graduating, which was just a cupboard with a bathroom. The location was important, but the rent still consumed the majority of my savings. I needed to be in the center of things, where possible partners and investors might meet for coffee. It was a harsh first 3 months. I spent 18 to 20 hours a day coding while subsisting on energy drinks and quick noodles. I began my app in college as a way to streamline corporate communication systems, which I found to be a major hassle when working as an intern. However, it was a very different task to transform a functional prototype into a product that was ready for the market. The root of my breakthrough was unexpected. One morning, as I was taking a break from my part-time job as a barista to pay my rent, a man in a suit saw me coding. When he inquired what I was working on, I chose to give him my elevator pitch rather than my typical evasive response. As it happens, he was working as a project manager for a large tech business, handling the very type of communication problems that my program was intended to address. He offered to use his team to beta test my app for 6 weeks. I received practical input from real users. Although there were bugs, UI problems, and features that needed to be adjusted, the app's fundamental operation was sound. Above all, the team adored it. Even after the beta test was over, they began utilizing it for all of their projects. As soon as word got out, other teams in the organization wanted to use it as well. Their head of innovation, who was considering investing, was introduced to me by the project manager. However, they were hoping for more. More features, more refinement, more evidence that this was scalable. For 2 weeks straight, I worked non-stop to create new features and integrate all of the comments. My aunt, who is usually supportive yet concerned about my health, gave me care packages with coffee and snacks. When she said, "Your mother would tell you to take better care of yourself," I could sense the pride in her voice. It was a weird meeting with the investors. Wearing a suit I borrowed from a friend, I entered a room full of executives. As I displayed the program, my voice remained firm despite my trembling palms. There was silence when I was done. I will never forget what the chief of innovation stated next. "This isn't just a solution. It's the future of corporate communication." In exchange for a 15% share in my business, they promised to invest $2 million. Although the valuation exceeded my expectations, they also had other goals in mind. They aspired to be my first significant customer, deploying the software throughout their whole company. After that, things happened quickly. My initial hires were outstanding coders I knew in college who immediately supported my idea. I continued to live in my modest flat, but we moved into a proper workplace. Every dollar invested was used to grow the business. More interest was sparked by the app's success with our first significant customer. Other businesses began contacting them. We negotiated agreements with 3 Fortune 500 firms in less than 6 months. Our staff expanded from 4 to 20 members. Not only was revenue consistent, it was booming. We conducted a second funding round a year following the initial investment. At a $100 million valuation, we raised $15 million this time. The app my father had rejected was now a major force in business software. When I informed my aunt the numbers, she started crying. She then revealed to me something I was unaware of. 6 months prior, she had visited my father in an attempt to persuade him to make amends. "He just got lucky," was his reply. "It won't endure." However, it did endure. Indeed, it continued to expand. We continued to solve larger challenges, develop new products, and innovate. Prominent tech journals began to write about us. I received invitations to give talks at conferences. My name was well known in the industry. The finest aspect: I never once contacted my brother or father despite all of this prosperity. I kept my distance from them, concentrating on creating something worthwhile rather than disproving them, even if they could see my accomplishment in the news, on tech websites, and in trade publications. That tactic proved to be ideal as the subsequent events, which I will discuss in the upcoming update, demonstrate the precise nature of karma. Let's just say that my father's confidence in his business sense and the golden child's true ability were going to be put to the test in a way they never anticipated. You'll want to know how my brother's promised economic success worked out and what transpired when they finally had to confront the truth about how they had treated me in the past. Update 2. Since my last update, things have drastically changed. Do you recall my father's constant insistence that my brother had genuine commercial potential? That story simply blew up in a big way, and I was right there in the thick of it. I found out through business contacts that my brother, with Dad's support, had launched a chain of upscale sports bars. The idea was straightforward: upscale locations where business leaders could enjoy elegant game viewing. In order to finance this sure thing, Dad had to liquidate a sizable amount of his retirement fund. He was confident that my brother's innate financial acumen would ensure its success. My brother's total inexperience in restaurant management, he had never even had a service position, should have been the first warning sign. That was beneath him, Dad had always claimed. Rather, he appointed managers who were none of his former football friends and had no relevant experience. All flash, no substance, their business plan was essentially a joke. They utterly neglected fundamentals like inventory control and employee training while spending outrageous sums on ostentatious settings and extravagant decorations. My brother's conviction that wealthy people would pay anything served as justification for the exorbitant charges. After observing their operation, one of my developers, who was formerly employed in restaurant technology, declared it to be a disaster waiting to happen. Their inventory management was essentially non-existent. Their point-of-sale system was antiquated, and their staff turnover was skyrocketing as a result of poor management. From day one, the first location lost money. My brother persuaded Dad to create a second location, claiming that they only needed to scale up to be profitable, rather than tackling the underlying problems. Dad took out loans to make it happen because he still had faith in his golden child's unfailing business acumen. The violations of the health code followed. It turns out that things go awry when you assign inexperienced friends to handle the meal service. Both sites received numerous citations. A critical article published by the local restaurant review blog went viral in the business world, which is precisely the audience they were aiming for. The actual kicker: my brother had been manipulating the figures to keep Dad from knowing how much they had lost. They discovered that each store was losing more than $50,000 a month. Due to subpar service and negative evaluations, their upscale clientele had vanished. My business, meantime, was doing very well. We had recently signed an agreement with a large chain of restaurants to use our management software throughout all of their locations. This software may have avoided many of my brother's business blunders. I didn't miss the irony. Dad had invested almost all of his retirement money in my brother's failing business. When the second location failed even more quickly than the first, he had to take out loans. They had enormous debt and no means of repaying it. My aunt informed me that Dad had to list his house for sale. After his reputation in the local business community was ruined, my brother returned home. He was unable to escape the fact that he was incompetent after all those years of being the golden child with innate commercial acumen. This is where things become fascinating though. Guess who had the chance to purchase the debt bundle that was sold to a collection agency? My company, that is correct. The universe can be funny sometimes, but this isn't how I had planned it. I haven't taken any action yet. I'm reserving that for later. My aunt recently told me that they're going to swallow their pride and seek my assistance, which is something they have never done before. You won't want to miss the story's conclusion, which will be revealed in the upcoming update. All those years of being the worthless son had, let's say, prepared the final scene. You don't always need to aggressively seek retribution. Sometimes the best course of action is to just stand back and let others deal with the fallout from their own choices. In Update 3, everything will come full circle in the most fulfilling way imaginable. Update 3. It's better than I could have ever scripted, and this is the last update. My brother and father finally arrived at my workplace yesterday without any prior notice or appointment. They simply showed up, seeming totally out of place in our contemporary computer environment. At first, they didn't recognize me. Since they last saw me, I've changed. Being successful has a way of altering your personality. My assistant messaged me while I was in the middle of a virtual meeting, saying, "2 men are demanding to see you. They say they're family." As I concluded my meeting, I made them wait in the foyer for 45 minutes. With screens showing our company's most recent accomplishments and press attention, I could see people becoming more and more uneasy through the glass walls. My brother continued to fumble with his collar. Dad appeared to have aged by 10 years. The expressions on their faces were amazing when I eventually got my assistant to let them in. Taking in the vista of Silicon Valley, the awards on the walls, and the proof of the success he never thought imaginable, Dad's gaze flew across my corner office. My brother and I could hardly look at each other. Dad said, "Son," without the normal authority in his voice. "You've done well for yourself." The compelled acknowledgement nearly made me chuckle. Even today, classic Dad was unable to offer a direct compliment. After a period of silent wriggling, I said, "What brings you here?" Initially, they attempted to dance around it. Dad made an effort to strike up a conversation about my computer business. He still couldn't bring himself to refer to it as a tech firm. My sibling gazed at his footwear. Now to the next story, Story 2. Mom sided with stepdad and his kids, kicked me out, but they forgot that I own the house. Now it's time to take it back. It never occurred to me, 35M, that my father's meticulous estate planning would ultimately cause our family to fall apart. There's a lot to digest here, and I want to make sure I'm giving you the whole picture, so let me start at the beginning. One of the big tech businesses in Seattle employs me as a senior software architect. My dad always had this kind of job in mind for me. "Technology is the future," he would exclaim proudly after I was accepted to UW's computer science program. He had a profitable construction business and wasn't a techie, but he had a remarkable knack for predicting trends. Beginning with the recession of the late 1980s, Dad started his construction business from the ground up throughout some of the most difficult periods in the industry. He took on projects that other contractors wouldn't take on, using only a pickup truck and his tools. Back then, Mom told me, they lived in a small apartment and were frugal, but Dad had this unwavering faith in his vision. He would frequently remark, "The key is to build relationships, not just buildings." That way of thinking got him through his difficult early years. Dad's business was unique because of the way he treated both customers and staff. Even if it meant losing some bids to rivals who made exaggerated deadline promises, he was a firm believer in open pricing and truthful schedules. "First, establish trust," he would advise. He was correct when he said, "The profits will follow." His business, which was renowned for taking on intricate restoration projects requiring both technical expertise and historical sensitivity, rose to prominence in the Seattle area by the mid-1990s. Because of the devotion he had developed with his clients and staff, Dad's business survived the 2008 financial crisis, when many construction companies were failing. He didn't fire a single employee during that period. Rather, he reduced his personal income to zero and took out a second mortgage on his cherished Mustang. I learned more about leadership from watching him handle that issue than I could have from any management course. "Your employees are your extended family," he told me. "You take care of them, they'll take care of your business." I didn't realize at the time how much his managerial approach affected my own career. Many of his ideas were put to use when I was promoted to team lead at my software business. I established thorough documentation procedures for our code, much as he had kept thorough project logs for every building site. I was able to lead my development team through challenging project deadlines thanks to his attention on fostering good relationships. I met Emily, 34F, at a hackathon in my junior year. She assisted in planning the event while pursuing her studies in business administration. Despite my lack of sleep, energy drink addiction, and likely messy appearance, she somehow found my love of code charming. From the first time he laid eyes on her, Dad fell in love. He told me, "She grounds you." Following their first meal together. "Don't let this one get away." After college, Dad even assisted Emily in launching her own marketing firm. He introduced her to his network of local company owners, showed her how he drafted his contracts, and shared his business objectives with her. He would tell us, "Success isn't just about what you know. It's about helping others succeed too." Dad was always imparting his expertise and educating. Those formative years were unique. Emily and I would always make the drive to my parents' house on Sundays to have dinner. We would all sit on the back deck that Dad had constructed and chat about everything and nothing while he lit the grill. Even though he couldn't understand the majority of the technical details of my most recent work, he would still ask in-depth inquiries. Mom used to say, "There they go again with the computer talk," with a loving eye roll. Dad's pride and joy was the house itself. He purchased it with the proceeds from his first significant construction job in the 1990s, which was a historic restoration project that made his business famous. In one of Seattle's older neighborhoods, this lovely craftsman-style home features a wraparound porch and a garage that he transformed into the most well-organized workshop you've ever seen. Labeled and placed with almost fanatical precision, each tool has its place. Dad handled the house as though it were a living example of his skill. Every renovation was meticulously organized and recorded. Every repair, improvement and paint job was documented in a thorough spreadsheet that he maintained. "A house is like a living thing," he would say as he demonstrated for me how to clean the gutters or inspect the foundation. He maintained a maintenance regimen that included everything from checking the roof after winter storms to changing air filters. Neglect the little things, and they become big problems. In addition to being his haven, the workshop served as a classroom where he taught me about subjects other than tools. In addition to adding unique storage options and a workbench he made especially for teaching me woodworking, he had completely renovated the garage himself. He would say, "Every piece of wood has its own story," as we were working. The pegboard wall with delineated shapes for each tool wasn't just about organization. It was his method of teaching me that everything has a place and a purpose. Our job is to help tell that story. Our family held weekends in high regard. In that garage, Dad and I would work on his 1967 Mustang for hours on end. When I was 12, Dad had purchased it for restoration, claiming it would be a project that would strengthen our bond as father and son. That vehicle turned into a life lessons classroom. His advice, which I still abide by now, was straightforward. Always use the right tool for the job. Or shortcuts look tempting, but they'll cost you in the long run. Although Dad might have completed the Mustang project in 1 year if he had so desired, it took 3 years. However, he was more interested in the process than the final destination. I learned everything from project management to fundamental mechanics from him. We took pictures of every component we changed, recorded each step and maintained thorough logs of our development. "This isn't just about fixing a car," he would affirm. "It's about learning how to break down big problems into manageable pieces." I found that lesson to be really helpful in my profession as a software developer. Emily and I purchased a small home around 20 minutes from my parents' house after we were married. Although Dad insisted that we take out the mortgage in our names, Dad assisted us with the down payment. "You need to build your own credit history," he clarified. "It's about standing on your own feet." He taught me how to install ceiling fans and fix drywall as he worked on our renovations on the weekends. He was preparing me for the responsibilities of home ownership even back then. At this time, my career was really taking off. I'd just received a promotion to team lead, overseeing a team that was creating cloud infrastructure solutions. I enjoyed every second of it. Even if the hours were long and the strain was great. During my lunch breaks, Dad would frequently call to check in, without discussing anything specific. He was aware of the demands of managing a group and overseeing the work of others. "Remember to delegate," he would say. "You can't do everything yourself, just like I can't build a house alone." When Dad initially stated feeling exhausted all the time, we were discussing the possibility of starting a family. He continued to put off seeing a doctor, despite Mom's insistence. "Just working too hard," he would dismiss our worries. He was working on his largest project to date, a multi-million-dollar development deal that would have established his business for the ensuing 10 years. In retrospect, I regret not pressing harder and insisting on those examinations sooner. Perhaps things might have turned out differently. At the time, the business was expanding quickly. Dad was discussing growing into historical restoration projects in the Pacific Northwest and had recently launched a second office in Portland. He has established a reputation for updating the infrastructure of historic structures without sacrificing their character. He would tell his clients, "It's about embracing the future while respecting the past." Everything he accomplished, including his personal and professional life, was impacted by his love of preservation. The Mustang was the subject of our last meaningful discussion. He was discussing taking it to car shows now that we had completed the restoration. When he remarked, "We should sign up for the Pacific Northwest Classic," his eyes glowed like a child's. He continued to plan for the future until the very end, saying, "Show these youngsters what a real muscle car looks like." It began like any other morning until everything changed. When Mom called, my phone buzzed while I was in an early meeting. We were in the midst of an important project conversation, so I nearly didn't respond. But I had to go out and take it for some reason. Mom was crying so hard she was having trouble speaking. Dad had passed out on a construction site. He had left by the time I arrived at the hospital. According to the physicians, it was a sudden and severe heart attack. He was only 58. The weeks following Dad's passing were a haze of mourning and bureaucracy. The funeral was crowded. Dad's business and community involvement had impacted countless people. Suppliers, contractors, and even rival businesses came to show their support. Everybody shared a story about how Dad had supported them, given them advice, or simply been there for them when they needed someone to confide in. One old craftsman told me how, despite being unable to work during a protracted illness, Dad had managed to keep him on the payroll. "Your father understood that business was about people first," he stated. The workers of the company were heartbroken. Many of them had known Dad for decades, and they told me things I had never heard before, like how he had paid for the college textbooks of one foreman's daughter, assisted another through a divorce, or remained late to teach apprentices the nuances of historical restoration. With pictures and handwritten remarks from both clients and employees, the workplace conference room was transformed into an unofficial monument. We were all surprised by how well Dad had prepared for everything. His attorney, Mr. Anderson, summoned us in for a meeting a week following the funeral. He took out this enormous accordion file that read Family Security Protocol and was neatly handwritten by Dad. Dozens of carefully arranged papers with comprehensive instructions for various areas of his land were found within. I was given a 3-day tour of Dad's estate paperwork by Mr. Anderson. Each color-coded container had personal notes outlining his decisions in addition to legal paperwork. "I've never seen an estate plan this thoroughly in my 35 years of practice," Mr. Anderson remarked. Dad had even included a 5-year business transition plan with backup plans for various circumstances. After that, Mom began going to her church's bereavement support group. She first met Steve, 58M, there. Initially, she only mentioned him in passing. Steve suggested this great book about healing. Or, Steve said it's normal to feel this way. He was one of the group facilitators and had lost his wife to cancer 2 years earlier. Even if it seemed a little early, I was happy that she was receiving support. I was reminded by Emily that everyone experiences grief in a unique way. Every Tuesday night, the church grief support group met. Before long, Mom was attending church functions with Steve more often. After services, coffee gatherings became lunch meetings, which in turn became dinner dates. Our family friends began to worry about how quickly their friendship was developing. At a family get-together, my Aunt Jane pulled me aside because she was concerned that Mom was hurrying into things to make up for Dad's absence. Mom's changes became more apparent. Her haircut changed, she started dressing differently, and she even threw out the garden that Dad had helped her create. Every time I questioned these changes, she would respond, "It's time for a fresh start." Dad was hardly ever mentioned by the woman who used to spend hours narrating her life with him. It went more quickly than any of us had anticipated. Mom announced that Steve was moving in 6 months after Dad's death. James, 30M, and Lisa, 32F, his own grown children, felt it would be beneficial to bring life back into the house. I made an effort to be sympathetic, but it seemed like she was in a rush to replace everything Dad had constructed. "I'm at a crossroads right now. How can I preserve Dad's legacy without jeopardizing Mom's chances for happiness?" Emily advises me to strike a balance, but I can't help but think of Dad's letter. "Son, preserve those memories. First update. I apologize for the wait for the update and appreciate all of the advice you gave on my previous article. 3 months have passed since my last post, and things have become much worse. Steve's domineering demeanor used to bother me, but now he acts as though he owns the house my dad left me. Steve made the decision to begin a significant restoration project last month without even asking my permission. The built-in bookshelves my dad had made for the living room were being torn up by contractors when I visited one weekend. As if he owned the building, Steve was watching over them and directing them to just throw all this old wood in the dumpster. These were the final project Dad and I worked on together before he became ill, so they were more than just shelves. He responded angrily when I approached him. He said, "Look, son," with a condescending emphasis on the pronoun. This house needs to be brought into the 21st century. Your father's taste was, well, dated. We're doing you a favor by increasing the property value. I reminded him that any modifications required my consent legally. Mom obviously agreed with him, but he simply chuckled and added, "Your mother and I live here. We don't need permission to improve our home." "Steve knows about these things," she acknowledged. "He's just trying to help." The woman who formerly loved those bookshelves and used to place her collection of antique teacups on them for Christmas now acts as though they were just taking up room. I showed her Dad's thorough house maintenance plans, but she disregarded them as dwelling in the past. Additionally, the relationship with Steve's children has deteriorated. James has taken over Dad's workshop and transformed it into a CrossFit facility. While I was on a business trip, he held a garage sale and sold the majority of Dad's tools. By repainting rooms and installing modern vinyl planks in place of Dad's meticulously refinished hardwood floors, Lisa is treating the space as though it were her own personal design project. One evening after dinner, Steve grabbed me aside and said, "Since we're paying to live here, we should have our names on the deed. It's only fair." I had to explain him that they don't pay a mortgage because Dad's planning has paid for the house in full. They don't even cover their rent. All maintenance expenses, insurance, and property taxes are paid for by me. Emily recommended that we stop making weekly visits. Now that Emma is here, she is correct, no one benefits from the stress in that household. However, taking a back seat has only made Steve more confident. He began sending me bills for improvements that I never approved, and he began making them more regularly. I should be more sympathetic of Mom's new life, according to Mom's sister, who called me recently. I attempted to explain Dad's intentions and my legal obligations, but she simply accused me of being trapped in the past. "Steve makes her happy. Why can't you just let them make the house their own?" she asked. I found out this week that the growth markers that recorded my height from the ages of 3 to 18 had been removed from the kitchen door frame. Every birthday, Dad would measure me and write the date next to each mark. "It's just an old door frame. We can't keep every piece of wood just because your father touched it," Mom remarked when I confronted her about it. I now spend more time sitting in Dad's old chair, the only piece of furniture I was able to keep, in my own garage. Mr. Anderson advises me to begin considering long-term fixes. Legally, the house belongs to me, but I will eventually have to make some difficult choices regarding its destiny. When does being the bad guy become more important than preserving your father's legacy? And when your whole family opposes you, how do you defend the moral high ground? Update 2. I appreciate all of your advice regarding my previous post. The situation has reached a breaking point and I've finally made a choice that will most likely alter everything. I spoke with my financial advisor about the house situation last week. We may make a sizable rental income, enough to cover Emma's future college fund, because nearby property values have risen by 40% in the last 3 years. I discovered at the discussion that I had been so preoccupied with the sentimental elements that I had failed to take into account the financial ramifications of allowing Mom and Steve to live rent-free. Everything went haywire when I brought this up to Mom in our weekly conversation. She yelled into the phone, "You can't do this to us. This is where we call home. Steve has worked really hard on it." She refused to listen when I tried to explain that I was only considering my choices. She continued to talk about all the enhancements they had made, utterly disregarding the fact that I had never given my approval for these changes. An hour later, Steve called. He was upset, and his tone was different from his usual arrogant demeanor. "Listen here," he announced. "In this house, we have established a life. Because you're missing your father, you can't just walk in and ruin everything." He interrupted me when I attempted to explain the financial issues, stating that they now had sweat equity in the property. I reminded him that the house belonged to me legally. "There's a reason why Dad left it to me." "Your father isn't here anymore," he replied. "You must consider the living." I talked to Emily about it and talked to Mr. Anderson about it before deciding on it the following day. When I arrived at the house, Mom and Steve were working on yet another remodeling job. In the dining room, they had begun ripping out the original crown molding, which Dad had specifically milled to blend in with the house's antique style. That image made me more determined. "They have 2 weeks to find another place to live," I told them. Mom burst into tears at once, accusing me of being callous and harsh. Steve tried to scare me by arguing with me about my inability to throw them out on the street. He began enumerating all of their local ties, including his place of employment, their church, and their neighborhood pals. When faced with challenging circumstances, I maintained my composure and firmness, as my father had taught me. I declared, "This is my property. Dad left it to me for a reason, and I'm exercising my legal right as the owner." Steve's cheeks flushed, And he began to enumerate all the money they had spent on upgrades. I informed him that the historical value of the property had actually been diminished by these unapproved alterations. When Lisa returned home and joined the debate, things became worse. Mom utilized her pregnancy as emotional leverage right away. "How are you able to treat your stepsister in this way? She will give birth to a child." Although Lisa's pregnancy is significant to them, I had to tell them that it does not affect my property rights and that she is not my stepsister. There has been an ongoing assault of emotional manipulation ever since. Mom's whole family has banded together to oppose me. Her sister called, sobbing, and said their parents wanted to make sure Mom was safe. Messages regarding the challenging rental market were left by Steve's brother, a local real estate agent. Long messages on Christian ideals and family loyalty are even coming from distant cousins who I hardly know. Dealing with family friends who have known me since my early years is the most difficult. People who grew up with me now tell me how unhappy they are with my decisions, and every call seems like another tiny betrayal. Some even claim that I'm damaging Dad's standing in the neighborhood. The problem is that this has nothing to do with cruelty or profit. This is about honoring Dad's desires and preserving the things he created. It has been agonizing enough to see them methodically destroy all traces of him. The house was his legacy. I've paid for all of their expenses, allowed them to live rent-free for years, and put up with their unapproved changes. Eventually, enough is enough. They have 2 weeks to come up with new plans. I'm refusing to give in to Mom's constant demands for more time. Mr. Anderson claims that the law is entirely on my side and that I have been more than giving. He is assisting me with creating official paperwork for the notice to vacate, ensuring that everything is accurately documented. I realize that this makes me appear to be the villain in everyone else's tale, but sometimes standing up for what's right requires making difficult choices, even when others disagree. I learned that from my dad. Third update. We appreciate everyone's help at this trying time. Things have come to an unavoidable end, therefore this will likely be my last update. I assigned Mom and Steve a 2-week deadline, but it's already passed. The past 2 weeks have been the longest of my life. They have been filled with guilt-tripping, continual emotional manipulation, and progressively frantic attempts to get me to change my mind. Mom did everything she could. Every day she called, oscillating between fury and tears. She would say, "I changed your diapers," one day. "I gave up everything for you," she would yell the next day. Steve also changed strategies, trying to negotiate instead of using intimidation. He recommended establishing a formal lease and offered to begin paying rent. I couldn't rely on them to uphold whatever agreements we made though, given what they had done to Dad's house. When I got to the house, there were people gathering on the front lawn 3 days prior to the deadline. Mom had enlisted the help of friends from church, family, and even some of Dad's former business partners. They had prepared statements about moral commitments and family responsibilities as part of what amounted to an intervention. I listened to people criticize me for being a bad son for 2 hours. The topic of honoring your parents was discussed by Mom's pastor. Dad's old secretary remembered his generosity with tears in her eyes. My elementary school teacher even came to remind me of the morals my father had attempted to teach me. The hardest part was when Lisa got up and talked about how stress could hurt her unborn child while covering her pregnant abdomen with her hands. While Mom was crying next to her, a few of the church women were glaring at me. It was an expert lesson in manipulating emotions. But during this ambush, an unexpected event occurred. I had a strange sense of serenity as I sat there listening to everyone talk about Dad. People who hadn't even been to his funeral suddenly professing to know what he would have wanted. Dad used to say, "Stand your ground when you know you're right." And I could almost hear his voice in my thoughts. I got to my feet and spoke to the group. I described how Dad planned everything carefully to ensure his family's future and how he had constructed this house by hand. I showed them pictures of Steve's unapproved modifications, including the historical elements he ruined and the fine craftsmanship he removed and replaced with flimsy modern fixtures. After that, I presented them with a letter from Dad outlining his reasons for leaving everything to me. Some of the elder business associates nodded as I read his remarks about trust, accountability, and preserving his legacy. They understood because they'd known Dad, really knew him. Shortly thereafter, the group scattered. While some looked disapproving, the righteous wrath had subsided, and others gently apologized as they walked away. Without saying another word, Mom and Steve returned inside. I showed there with Mr. Anderson and a locksmith on the morning of the deadline. Although they weren't required, I had hired a security company to be on hand just in case. The house was deserted. The remainder of their possessions were packed into Steve's truck. Steve couldn't help but give me a last poke, but Mom refused to look at me. As he assisted Lisa into his pickup, he asked, "You're happy with yourself?" Your father would be so proud of how you've treated your mother. I didn't answer. Dad would have known. I know he had prepared for this possibility. What other reason might he have had for being so explicit in his will? I strolled about the home after they had left. I had underestimated the extent of the harm. Builder-grade materials had been used to replace the original fittings. Dad had painted over or taken out his handcrafted woodwork. We had spent so many weekends at the workshop, and it had changed completely. I have no intention of pursuing damages, but Mr. Anderson documented everything for any legal considerations. I simply want to put this chapter behind me and concentrate on fixing what can be fixed. Some of Dad's old craftsman friends have already been contacted, and they are eager to assist in rebuilding the features that were taken out. For now, Mom is staying with her sister. The majority of my relatives have stopped talking to me altogether, however some sometimes call to chastise me. On social media, Steve's children continue to share heartbreaking updates about their poor mother being thrown out of her home, but fewer people are responding to each post. Through it all, Emily has been my pillar of support. She reminds me of Dad's letter whenever I begin to doubt myself, expressing his faith in my ability to make the right choices. I will eventually tell Emma about her grandfather and the heritage he attempted to preserve, but she is too little to comprehend what is occurring right now. To restore the house to its original state, I'm collaborating with a restoration professional. We can preserve the spirit of what Dad made, but it won't be perfect. Some things can't be reversed. First, the workshop will be restored. The same place where I learned from my father is where I want my daughter to study. Being the villain in someone else's tale is sometimes the price of doing the right thing. I may never be able to rebuild the relationships I lost, but I can live with the fact that I preserved what my father trusted me with. As Dad used to say, integrity is about doing the right thing, even when it hurts, and not about taking the easy route. I believe he would comprehend. My last update will be this one. I appreciate everyone's support along this journey. Now to the next story, Story 3. My family favored my sister and ignored me at her wedding, but at mine, she reconciled by gifting me our grandmother's heirloom bracelet. As a 42-year-old who has struggled with complicated family matters for as long as I can remember, I believe the time has come to tell my tale. To put it mildly, my relationship with my 38-year-old younger sister has never been easy. I've always felt like I was playing second fiddle in my own family, and it's obvious that our parents have always preferred her above me. Almost every element of my life, including my relationships, professional decisions, and even sense of self-worth, has been influenced by this emotion. My sister was the center of my parents' attention from an early age. I was more introverted and, to be honest, lonely, but she was always the gregarious, popular one. I very well recall the celebration for my 10th birthday. Only a few of the students who were invited by my parents came up. My sister, who was only 6 at the time, managed to steal the show and keep everyone entertained with her antics. When I stealthily went away to my room, holding back tears, my parents hardly noticed because they were so preoccupied with her. I was merely there at school, while my sister was the life of the party. "Why can't you be more outgoing like your sister?" is something I've heard more times than I can count. "And your sister is so lively, why aren't you?" These comparisons never stopped, gradually eroding my sense of self-worth. I began to think that there must be a problem with me, that just because I wasn't like my sister, I wasn't good enough. The preference only became more obvious as we got older. I made a valiant attempt to forge my own professional path, but my parents never seemed to appreciate it. It has always been, "You should network more like your sister." Or, "If you were as charming as your sister, you'd get promoted faster." Every achievement I made was compared to my sister's, and they always thought I fell short. I gave my best to my work in the hopes that my parents would eventually recognize my value if I could just achieve enough success. As I advanced in my job, I gave up my personal life to work late into the night and on the weekends. I recall working 80-hour weeks for months on end on one particularly taxing job. I was thrilled to contact my parents to tell them that I had finally gotten a significant client for my business. How did they react? "Oh, sweetheart, that's lovely. Have we informed you of your sister's recent employment? It will be 6 digits for her." That was always the case. It was never enough for them, no matter how high I climbed. In contrast, my sister managed to get by on her charm and the steadfast backing of our parents. Please understand that I adore my sister. She is not a nasty person, and I am aware that our parents' different treatment of us is not her fault. However, it might be difficult to avoid feeling bitter at times, particularly when she appears unaware of the privileged treatment she receives. My sister got married last month. It would be an understatement to say that our parents were ecstatic. They dedicated a large portion of their cash as well as their hearts and souls to organizing the wedding. I thought it may be an opportunity for us to strengthen our family ties, so I offered to assist with the preparations, but I was graciously turned down at every stage. "Oh, you're so busy with work, we wouldn't want to bother you," they'd reply. In actuality though, they didn't want me to get involved. I made an effort to be upbeat, telling myself that it wasn't about me and that it was my sister's big day. However, I began to feel increasingly alienated from my own family as the wedding day drew near. When I learned that my parents had asked my sister's best friend to be her maid of honor without even taking me into consideration, it was the last straw. My mother simply remarked, "Well, you're not really the maid of honor type, are you?" when I challenged them about it. "We believed that a lower function would better suit you." The actual wedding day was challenging. My sister was praised throughout our parents' remarks, which included stories about her early years and their pride in the lady she had grown into. Not a word about me was said. They acted as though I didn't exist and that the three of them made up their entire family. On the inside, I felt like I was crumbling, but I sat there trying to smile. I heard my mother speaking to one of her friends after the ceremony. "We're so relieved," she remarked. "We were worried we might never get to experience a wedding day like this." It was obvious that they didn't believe I would ever get married. The worst was still to come, but it felt like a kick to the belly. My mother drew me aside later that night. I briefly entertained the idea that she may express regret for not including me in the remarks. Rather, she said something that will always stick in my memory. "Don't stress about your wedding. Since this might be the only one we get to plan, we put our all into it." We wanted to ensure that we did it correctly. Something broke inside of me at that very instant. All of the years I had spent feeling inferior and attempting to get their acceptance came tumbling down. However, it also seemed as though a fog had dissipated. I realized for the first time just how poisonous our family dynamic had become. The problem is that I'm not some lonesome spinster that they should be concerned about. 39M, my amazing fiancé, believes in me and loves me for who I am, not what he believes I should be. He has supported me through all of this family dysfunction over our 2 years of dating. It was him who persuaded me to go to therapy and begin addressing my problems with self-esteem. 3 years ago, I met my fiancé during a seminar at work. I was reluctant to let him in at first. I'd been scared of partnerships for years because I felt unworthy. However, he was gentle and patient, gradually dismantling the barriers I had put up around myself. I can still clearly recall the instant I knew I was falling for him. As we spent a peaceful evening together, I told him about a challenging workday. He simply listened without trying to solve problems or make things better. Then he said, "You realize how wonderful you are? You are amazing in the way you approach problems and the way you take pride in your job." I felt genuinely noticed and valued for who I am for the first time in my life. All of this familial drama has been greatly supported by my fiancé. He has comforted me when I've sobbed following tough phone conversations with my parents. He has urged me to put my own mental health first and to establish limits. Furthermore, he has never made me feel inadequate or likened me to my sister. Since college, 41F, my incredible best friend, has been by my side. When I'm feeling overwhelmed by self-doubt, she's always there to remind me of my strengths. She repeatedly reassured me that I deserved more while holding me while I sobbed after the wedding. In my life, our connection has consistently provided encouragement and affirmation. She has witnessed my darkest moments and has never passed judgment on my difficulties with my family. Rather, she has consistently provided me with a sympathetic ear, a shoulder to weep on, and occasionally a harsh reality check when I begin to internalize my parents' criticism. Building a life away from the influence of my family has also been greatly aided by my best buddy. She is the one who inspired me to follow interests and pastimes that I find enjoyable, even if they don't align with my parents' preferences. Because of her, I've developed a love for painting, which I never would have attempted if my only goal had been to please my parents. For me, these painting sessions have turned into a kind of therapy where I can release feelings that I've suppressed for years. I'm currently working to take back my life and my self-esteem. I'm attempting to strengthen my sense of self while in treatment and healing from years of emotional neglect. It's not simple. On some days I can still hear my parents' judgmental voices telling me that I'm not good enough. However, I'm learning to confront those ideas and remind myself of my own value and potential. My fiancé and I are discussing our own wedding plans, which will be small and personal and accurately represent who we are as a pair. It's thrilling, but it also evokes a wide range of complex feelings. To show my parents that I'm deserving of a celebration, I secretly hope to have the lavish wedding my sister had. However, I'm making an effort to remind myself that this day should be about me and my fiancé, not about giving my family proof of anything. I'm also trying to figure out why my sister and I are treated so differently by our parents in therapy. According to my therapist, My parents' actions may be a result of their own fears and unmet expectations. With her gregarious demeanor and social success, my sister might be the embodiment of everything they've always wanted to be. They might be reminded of their own perceived shortcomings by my more reserved demeanor and emphasis on professional achievement. This lets me see them as flawed people rather than as all-powerful people whose approval I must gain, even while it doesn't justify their actions. However, I'm having trouble deciding how to proceed with my family. I want to completely cut them off in order to shield myself from more harm. I also harbor the hope that we might be able to mend our friendship. However, I'm not really sure where to begin. I've considered going up to them and telling them how they've harmed me over the years, but I'm scared they'll just brush it off as they always do. Even worse, they'll reverse it and blame me for my sister's success, saying that I'm the issue because I'm too sensitive or envious. According to my fiancé, I ought to offer them one final opportunity to get together and discuss our relationship openly. He thinks there's a chance they would realize and desire to change if I can articulate how their actions have affected me. He has volunteered to support me by being present if I choose to have this chat. However, my best friend believes that I should put my own recovery first and avoid them, at least for the time being. She fears that attempting to mend the relationship before I've resolved my personal problems completely could hinder my advancement. Instead, she said, I might want to write them a letter to describe how I feel without having to respond right away. I'm conflicted. They are my family, on the one hand. A part of me still yearns for their affection and acceptance in spite of everything. There are both pleasant and painful memories in me, such as my mom consoling me after my first heartbreak and my dad teaching me how to ride a bike. I question whether it's worth struggling for those moments of connection. However, I'm worn out after years of trying to live up to their expectations only to be ignored and underappreciated all the time. I'm concerned that if I keep talking to them, I might not be able to get well and go on with my life. Additionally, I fear that my future children will experience the same suffering and insecurity that I have. As I type this, I'm aware that I've never really put all of these emotions into words before. It is both overpowering and somewhat freeing. I've devoted a significant portion of my life to attempting to fulfill the expectations of my parents. I'm now at last beginning to understand who I am and what I desire. I'm looking to you, Reddit, for guidance. How would you respond if I were you? How can I handle this complicated familial situation? Should I concentrate on starting a new family with my fiancé and friends who genuinely care about me, or is there any chance that we may mend our relationship? If any of you have experienced comparable circumstances, how did you respond? Was it best for you to keep your distance from your family, or were you able to mend your relationship with them? How did you handle the guilt and the pressure from society to keep family ties intact if you did remove yourself? I appreciate you reading this far. I realize it was lengthy. Finally sharing something with someone, even if they are only complete strangers you met online, feels nice. I would be very grateful for any guidance or words of encouragement. I feel like I'm at a fork in the road and don't know which way to go. However, I am aware that I cannot stay in this state of uncertainty and keep looking for unfulfilled acceptance. A change is needed, but I'm not clear what that modification should entail. First update. 2 months have passed since my last post, and I wanted to give you all an update on what has been going on. Firstly, I would like to express my gratitude to everyone who read my tale and gave me advice. Your assistance has been priceless. The most significant shift has been in how I view myself. I've been going to therapy regularly, and my self-esteem is really improving. I'm working through years of emotional maltreatment and continual comparison to my sister with the support of my therapist. Although it's challenging, I'm coming to value myself regardless of my family's opinion. It has been beneficial to keep a wins journal. I jot down one accomplishment, no matter how minor, every day. I'm gradually coming to terms with the fact that, despite what my family may believe, I am competent and deserving. I've also shared my difficulties with my coworkers. Unexpectedly, a lot of others had comparable experiences, which made me feel less alone and opened up some fantastic mentorship opportunities. My relationship with my fiancé has undergone the biggest shift. Our relationship has strengthened as we prepare for our wedding. Throughout it all, he has been my pillar of support, always ready to listen and offer uncritical support. We've discussed our future in great detail, including how we want to handle family dynamics with our own prospective children. Speaking up about my anxieties of repeating the habits I was raised with has been both frightening and freeing. In addition to being understanding, my fiancé has pledged to constantly work with me to establish a kind, encouraging household. While talking about wedding arrangements last week, an unforgettable moment occurred. To show my family that I'm deserving of a celebration, I acknowledge that a part of me wants a lavish wedding like my sister's. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. my fiancé replied. I want our wedding to be about us, not your parents or anybody else, because you deserve to be celebrated every day. His remarks served as a warning. I came to the realization that I was still unconsciously trying to win my parents' approval. We have now made the decision to organize a wedding that accurately captures who we are as a couple. We have made some firm decisions. We intend to have a small, private ceremony with only our closest friends and family, perhaps at sunset on the beach or in a garden. We wish to honor our love and dedication in a cozy, happy setting. We're thinking of combining our love of the outdoors with the romance of beginning a married life by going trekking in a national park for our honeymoon. But I'm not sure if I should invite my sister and parents to the wedding. Reconciliation is something I wish for, but I'm afraid they'll ruin our day or say something cruel. My fiancé has been encouraging and has promised to support my decision no matter what. In order to establish clear guidelines for acceptable behavior, he has even offered to speak with my family if we invite them. My maid of honor, who is also my best friend, has been a huge help. She has immersed herself into the wedding planning process, and her excitement for this new phase of my life has been a lovely diversion from my complex familial feelings. She has been gently encouraging me to think about my own desires, apart from any obligations to my family. I am reminded by her that today is your day. You deserve to be in the company of people who truly appreciate you. 2 months later, I'm in a lot better place. I'm beginning to see my own power and have more faith in myself. I'm learning that family is about people who support you without conditions, not simply genetic ties. And I'm creating a future with a partner who genuinely cherishes me. However, I continue to struggle with how to deal with my biological family. Should I risk drama by inviting them to the wedding? Should I speak with them again before making a decision? Or ought I to concentrate on this new phase of my life? Reddit, I'd love to know what you think. How have you responded to comparable circumstances involving weddings and family? I would appreciate any guidance on establishing limits or having challenging conversations. Once again, I appreciate your help. Having this place to reflect and share is really meaningful. I'll keep you informed as events develop. Second update. Since my last update, which was a month ago, a lot has transpired. I appreciate all of your suggestions and encouragement regarding my previous post. We decided to invite my sister and dad after considerable discussion with my therapist and fiancé. We took our time creating the ideal invitation, attempting to mix being warm with setting up appropriate boundaries. I didn't get the response I was hoping for. My mother called me 3 days after I sent out the invites. She initially appeared thrilled, but then the inquiries began. Why is the wedding so small? Do you not wish to have a formal celebration as your sister did? She laughed when I told her that we wanted a small ceremony that was true to who we were. You've always been really challenging. For once, can't you simply act normally? I made an effort to maintain my composure by applying the strategies I've been learning in therapy. I clarified that since it was our day, we intended to celebrate it any way we saw fit. My father picked up the phone at that point. I have been speaking with your mother, he stated forcefully. We believe that this little wedding is a mistake on your part. Family members find it embarrassing. What are people going to think? I was taken aback. They continued to care more about looks than about how happy I was. I remained calm and informed them that although I valued their opinions, the choice was definitive. My father was upset and my mother was crying as the call ended. My fiancé was there to encourage me even though I was shaken by the call. Reminding me that their response was about them and not about us, he held me while I sobbed. My sister sent me an unexpectedly encouraging text the following day. I called her, bewildered. At first our chat was difficult, but she opened up as we spoke. She remarked, "I've been considering our relationship a lot. I had no idea how much you were going through. You know, I've always envied you." I was surprised. Did you envy me? But the favorite was always you. She gave a sorrowful laugh. I always felt like I was living in your shadow, maybe to our parents. You were really intelligent and motivated. I believed that in order to receive any attention at all, I needed to be the life of the party. For the first time in years, we actually spoke for hours on end. I apologized for the resentment I had held, and she apologized for the instances in which she had been disrespectful. It seemed like a beginning, but it wasn't a miracle solution. But a new problem has emerged as a result of our increased knowledge. My sister wants to contribute to the wedding and play a significant role in it. I'm excited about the prospect of repairing our connection, but I'm also cautious. Could it be that this is merely preparing me for further disappointment? Although he believes it's a good step, my fiancé is letting me make the final decision. My best buddy, who reminds me of all the hurt I've endured in the past, is more wary. She remarked, "It's acceptable to have hope, But remember to take precautions as well. I'm conflicted. Though I'm afraid of exposing myself to additional suffering, this could be the start of a new, healthy relationship with my sister. Then there is our parents' problem. If my sister is involved but they are kept at a distance, how would they respond? Regarding the actual wedding, we are proceeding with our preparations. We've located a stunning garden location that embodies the private, romantic ambiance we're aiming for. We've decided on a color palette, selected flowers, and begun researching catering choices. I'm getting enthusiastic about these details despite the familial drama. Regardless of who shows up, it serves as a reminder that this day is about celebrating our love. Throughout everything, my fiancé has been my pillar of support. He's given me space when I've needed to think things through alone, been understanding when I've needed to rant, and given me advice when I've asked for it. I'm even more convinced that marrying him is the perfect choice because of his consistent support. I'm focusing on establishing and upholding limits in my treatment. In order to prepare me for any challenging situations that may come up, my therapist has been helping me rehearse reactions to possible events at the wedding. Having to prepare for a confrontation on what should be one of the best days of my life makes me feel empowered, but it also makes me a little melancholy. I'm at another fork in the road, Reddit. Should I accept my sister's offer to assist with the wedding, which could lead to a reconciliation but also increase the likelihood of further harm? How do I strike a balance between the need to protect myself and my desire for family harmony? Furthermore, how can I deal with my parents' criticism without allowing it to ruin our special day? Any guidance or first-hand knowledge would be very valued. Again, I want to thank everyone for their support. You have no idea how much it means. Third update. A week has passed since our wedding, and I wanted to give everyone who has helped me along the way this last update. Everything's all occurred so quickly, and I'm still absorbing everything. I gave my sister's offer to assist with the wedding a lot of thought before accepting. Although it was a risk, I thought it was worthwhile. There was a lot going on in the days before the wedding. I was astonished at how well my sister and I worked together on the last-minute details. Although there were tense moments, we were able to resolve them and have open communication. The actual wedding day was tense. My parents were seated in the front row as I started down the aisle. My father actually grinned at me while my mother wiped at her eyes. It was something, even though it wasn't the kind of proud, warm smile I had always wanted. The ceremony was kind, intimate, and all we could have imagined. I felt as though everything else vanished as my fiancé and I exchanged vows. We were the only ones making pledges to one another at that very moment. My sister came up to me with a tiny wrapped surprise during the reception. An exquisite silver bracelet that had belonged to our grandmother was found within. She gave me the bracelet, which had been a source of conflict between us for years, as a gesture of goodwill. My father later asked me to dance, which surprised me. He remarked, "Your mother and I, we may not have always understood you, but seeing you today, you seem happy." As we moved uncomfortably to the music. Incredibly joyful. It felt like an acknowledgement, but it wasn't an apology. The remainder of the evening was a haze of joy, dancing and laughter. Although there were tense times, it was a happy occasion all around. Throughout it all, my new spouse was by my side, cheering me on in the good times and encouraging me in the bad. My sister took me aside one final time as we were heading out on our honeymoon. "I want you to know that even though our relationship hasn't always been easy, I'm proud of you," she said. Additionally, I hope that we can continue to improve our friendship. Since the wedding, the days have been a combination of peaceful introspection and honeymoon delight. Disengaged from the outside world and concentrating on one another, my spouse and I hiked in a national park for a fantastic week. I'm trying to take in all that happened now that we're home. Since I got back, I've been seeing my therapist, and we've been discussing how I feel about the wedding and how it will affect my future relationships with my family. She has reminded me that it's acceptable to still feel conflicted while also encouraging me to recognize the constructive actions that were performed. My spouse and I have discussed limits and the type of connection we hope to have with my family in the future. We acknowledge that maintaining open communication is important, but we also recognize that our small family must come first. Since the wedding, my sister and I have texted each other a few times. They have been friendly yet hesitant. Next week, we're going to get together for coffee to discuss this further. Although there is still some tension with my parents, there seems to be a change. When my mother called to inquire about the honeymoon, the conversation was a little stilted, but it lacked the criticism I've grown accustomed to. I'm struck by how much has changed as I think back on the entire experience, from my first post to this point. I'm not gullible enough to believe that our family's problems are all behind us. I'm aware that much work remains to be done, but I feel hopeful for the first time in a long time. This process has taught me a lot about who I am. Even when people don't value me, I've learned to set boundaries, stand up for what I want and value myself. I've discovered that while it's acceptable to wish for improved ties with my family, their acceptance does not determine my value. Above all, I've discovered that family isn't just about blood, it's also about the people who encourage you, share in your happiness, and support you through your hardships. Through this, my best friend, my spouse, and even some of you on Reddit have been like family to me. I want to let anyone who is dealing with comparable family problems know that things do get better. It may not be flawless. It may not be what you had anticipated. However, there is still hope. Don't be scared to set boundaries. Surround yourself with people that genuinely care about you and keep improving yourself. Once again, I want to thank everyone for their support along this trip. I have greatly benefited from your counsel, support, and shared experiences. Without you, I couldn't have survived this. Cheers to fresh starts, recovery, and building the kind of love and support that each of us deserves. Now, on to the next story, Story 4. I was always the forgotten one in my family, but now they want me back. My next decision will change everything in my life. In my family, I, 42, have always been the unnoticed child. I'm not sure how to respond to my parents' sudden desire for me to return to their lives. There is a big age difference between myself and my 5 siblings, of which I am the youngest. As a child, I frequently had the impression that my house was a parallel universe. I was just there, the quiet one, the one who didn't cause trouble, the one who was easy to forget, while my siblings were in and out of hospitals and therapy sessions all the time. One of my first memories is of returning home from school to find the house deserted. Nobody checked my schoolwork or inquired about my day. Everyone was too preoccupied with my siblings' problems to realize that I also needed to eat, so I learned to cook for myself early. I vividly remember how disappointed I was when my parents failed to remember my birthday for 3 consecutive years. They were just overwhelmed. It wasn't that they were awful people. I suppose they felt they didn't have to worry about me because they had 4 children who were coping with different health and mental health problems. I was the normal one, the healthy one. However, it's not as easy as it seems to be the normal one in a chaotic family. Throughout his childhood and adolescence, my 52-year-old oldest brother had to spend a lot of time in the hospital due to a serious chronic condition. He still has health issues and is largely dependent on our parents for assistance. Since I can remember, my 50-year-old elder sister has been in therapy or taking medicine for her early struggles with anxiety and depression. The 48-year-old twins who are the middle siblings needed special education and ongoing care due to their learning difficulties. Then there was myself, the last person to consider. The one who was supposed to comprehend, to be self-sufficient, to simply be there. It was out of need that I learned to be independent. I was essentially rearing myself by high school. I knew that grades were my ticket out, so I earned them. Not because anyone pushed me. I joined clubs and teams for the opportunity to spend as much time away from home as possible, not for the recognition. I remember one specific instance from my junior year of high school. It meant a lot to me that I had advanced to the debate state finals. I had put a lot of effort into it, practiced late into the night and given it my all. In the weeks before the finals, I mentioned it to my parents several times. I was set to go when I stepped downstairs on the morning of the event, wearing my finest attire. Frazzled as usual, my mom replied, "Oh, are you going somewhere?" as she hardly looked up from a stack of medical bills. I tried not to sound hurt as I reminded her about the debate finals. "It's today, I told you about it." She responded, "Oh right." But it was obvious that she couldn't truly recall. "All okay, good luck. We have to take your brother to his doctor's appointment, therefore your father and I are unable to attend." I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. Naturally, and always has been, my brother's health came before my argument. I made it to the finals by myself and finished in second. Nobody inquired about my experience when I arrived home. For weeks, the certificate I was given remained on my desk, hidden from everyone else. My getaway was college. I finally felt like I could breathe after deciding on a school on the opposite side of the nation. I made friends that didn't need to be reminded of my birthday, genuinely saw me and paid attention when I talked. M and C, 2 of them, grew to be the family I never had. MC and I made the decision to remain together after graduation. We started establishing our life after relocating to a new state that was far from any of our relatives. Determining that I made a difference, I threw myself into my career and I was successful. Now that I'm 42, my life appears to be going well. I run a skilled team as a senior marketing executive at a Fortune 500 firm, and I'm renowned for my creative problem-solving and ability to perform under pressure. Ironically, I became quite good at drawing attention to myself and making things visible because I was raised invisible. Meetings, presentations, and decisions occupy my days. Even though I put in a lot of overtime, I enjoy my job because it gives me a sense of worth and purpose that I didn't have as a child. People at work pay attention to what I have to say because they see me and respect my viewpoint. I never get tired of the euphoric feeling. My life is comfortable while I'm not working. I have a small but close-knit group of friends, I travel whenever I can, and I possess a lovely condo with a view of the city skyline. My best college pals, M and C, are still my pillars of support, and I've formed other deep bonds. We host movie marathons, game evenings, and weekend brunches. I've been addressing issues of abandonment and persistent feelings of invisibility in therapy for years. Although the process has been drawn out and occasionally difficult, it has improved my understanding of who I am. I've learned to respect myself, set limits, and quit looking to those who can't give me approval. My interactions with my family have been sparse for the past 20 years, rare visits every few years, and infrequent phone calls on holidays. To shield myself from the hurt of their apathy, I kept them at arm's length rather than cutting them off entirely. Then, unexpectedly, my mother called last week. We hadn't spoken for more than a year, and our most recent contact had been a clumsy exchange of pleasantries, so I nearly didn't respond. But I had to pick it up for some reason. Without even saying hello, she continued, "We want you to come home for Thanksgiving." She sounded older and more worn out than I could recall. "You are missed by your father and me." It seemed as though someone had punched me in the stomach. "Do you miss me? When I was growing up, where was this? When none of them appeared after I graduated from college. When I built a life for myself for 20 years. I stumbled. I'm not sure if I'll be able to make it. Work is really busy right now, and I have plans with friends." "Are you planning with friends?" Her voice assumed that tone of remorse that I was all too familiar with from my early years. "Your family is us. If you need to alter your plans, your pals will undoubtedly understand." Family seemed like a hollow term. After feeling like an afterthought my entire life, what did it mean? She went on to say, "Your siblings will all be here." Apparently oblivious to or choosing to disregard my reservations. To have everyone together once more would mean so much. I was filled with resentment. Is everyone back together? First of all, when had we ever been together? I couldn't recall a family meal where someone wasn't experiencing a crisis, going to therapy, or being admitted to the hospital. I finally said, "I'll think about it," to put an end to the discussion. However, I knew I wasn't going as soon as I hung up. I became physically nauseous at the idea of sitting around a table and looking like we were a happy, regular family and everything was good. 1 week later, I'm still debating the choice. I had a tiny kid-like want to leave, to think that perhaps, at last they noticed me. That perhaps they wish to make amends because they regret how they treated me. However, the mature side of me, the one that has had treatment and undergone the arduous process of recovery, is more aware of this. They haven't called because they've suddenly realized how much they've been ignoring me. My siblings are still having difficulties, they are growing older, and they have come to the realization that I'm the only one with their lives in order, which is why they are phoning. I'm their fallback option, not their daughter. I can't quit thinking about it though. What if I'm mistaken? What if this is a sincere effort to get back in touch? Am I being unforgiving or overly harsh? Or am I at last defending myself and establishing sound boundaries? I thought I had dealt with the feelings that the call had evoked. More than in years, I've been thinking back on my early years. I had a dream the other night that I was back in my former bedroom, shouting loudly, but no one could hear me. I felt like that forlorn, invisible youngster again as I woke up in a cold sweat. It also has an impact on my work. I was thinking about my family when I slept off at a crucial meeting yesterday. My team took note and continued to give me worried glances. I have a reputation for being calm and attentive, yet after just one phone call, I feel like I'm losing it. After discussing it with M and C, they both believe I shouldn't go. They have personally witnessed the harm done by my family and the years it has taken me to recover. They fear that returning home will reverse all of my gains. "There is nothing you owe them," M stated firmly. "Don't allow them to pull you back into their drama, you've created a wonderful life for yourself." C was more tactful. "Remember how long it took you to stop flinching every time the phone rang? I know it's hard," he continued. "When you first started establishing limits with them, how many panic attacks did you experience? Is all that development worth the risk?" I am certain that they are correct. However, that little voice of the young child who merely wanted her parents to notice and adore her is still inside of me. "Perhaps this time will be different," she's whispering. "They might finally be the family I've always desired this time." M and C also remind me that I have the freedom to choose, and they will be there for me no matter what. And I'm grateful for that, but it doesn't help with the decision. So here I am asking random people online for guidance. Is it improper of me to want to go? Is it selfish of me to prioritize my mental well-being over a family reunion? Or, after being ignored all my life, am I now acting in my own best interests? Even though Thanksgiving is still a few months away, I can't stop thinking about this. I'm struggling to focus at work and fall asleep. I become anxious every time my phone rings, wondering whether it's them calling again. A part of me wants to stop communicating with them, block their numbers, and carry on with my life as it has been. However, another part of me feels bad about even thinking about it. Even if they weren't particularly good parents, they are still my parents. I have no idea what to do. I'm not sure how to make sense of the difference between the accomplished, self-reliant adult I've become and the lonely, invisible child I was. I'm not sure whether I can deal with my family without becoming that frightened, abandoned young child again. What should I do, Reddit? Should I risk rehashing old wounds by attending this Thanksgiving dinner? Or should I keep my distance and possibly ruin any possibility of a reconciliation? When your parents suddenly want you in their lives after decades of ignoring you, how do you handle it? I would appreciate any guidance. I could really use an outside viewpoint because I feel like I'm drowning in uncertainty. Update 1: About 2 weeks have passed since my last post, and while I would like to claim that things have become more obvious, they have really gotten more confusing. Though recent events have taken me by surprise, I appreciate all of the support and advice. It has given me a lot to think about. First, my older brother, who has long-term health problems, called me out of the blue. It was unexpected to see his name on my caller ID because we haven't spoken face-to-face in years. I briefly believed that something horrible had occurred. His voice seemed older and more worn out than I remembered when he said, "Hey sis. Have you got a moment? We need to talk about something serious." I felt shivers down my spine at his tone. He seemed to be speaking for the entire family, and it sounded menacing. He went on, "Mom and Dad have been talking," without waiting for me to answer. "As they age, they are concerned about the future and who will look after things after they are gone." A knot started to form in my stomach. I hoped I was mistaken, but I had a feeling I knew where this was going. When they can no longer care for one of the boys, they want to appoint you as their legal guardian. The boys referred to our brothers who suffered from serious illnesses. It seemed as though someone had punched me in the stomach. Protector? Me? For most of my childhood, they hardly acknowledged me as the invisible child. "What?" I choked out. "Why me? Why now?" My brother let out a deep sigh. "Look, I realize this is a lot to ask, but you are the only one who is truly stable. Everyone else has their own problems. You've succeeded. You're in control of your life. They believe you to be the ideal option." What I was hearing was unbelievable. Suddenly, after years of being neglected and treated as an afterthought, I was given this enormous duty. It was like a horrible joke and it felt unreal. Have they even considered asking me about this? With a voice trembling with rage and incredulity, I demanded. Or were they just going to spring it on me at Thanksgiving? The person on the other end of the line paused for a while. When he eventually said, they were hoping to discuss it in person. I thought you should know beforehand, give you time to think about it. Consider it. How could I possibly consider being guardian of a brother that I don't really know? A sibling who has spent decades taking care of our parents. I can't do this, I replied, hardly raising my voice above a whisper. I can't just take on this duty and drop everything. My life is my own. Plans of my own. My brother remarked, "I know it's a lot," in an apologetic tone. They're desperate though. They must have confidence that someone will cover for them while they are away. I sat in startled silence for what seemed like hours after we hung up. It was all so utterly ridiculous. After years of ignoring me, they now wanted to put this huge responsibility on me without even consulting me. I thought things couldn't get any more confusing, but a few days later, I got a letter from my mother. It was lengthy, meandering, and chock full of the same guilt-tripping jargon I recalled from my early years. She continued by talking about how difficult things had been for them. How much they had given up for the family, and how much they needed me right now. Near the end was the section that truly affected me. "Sweetheart, we're not asking for much," she wrote. "All we need to know is that someone will take care of the family while we are away. Our only hope is you." Just hope. I mean, how many times did I need them? When I was growing up, feeling unwelcome and invisible, where was there hope for me? Ever since I got that letter, I've been a complete disaster. I've struggled to focus at work and sleep. My group has observed. Meetings have had to be rescheduled because I simply cannot focus. Every part of my life is being impacted by this circumstance, and I detest it. They still have this control over me, and I detest it. For an urgent wine and venting session, I invited M and C over. On my part, they were both indignant. "They can't do this to you," M exclaimed, her eyes glimmering with rage. "They cannot expect you to be their safety net after ignoring you for decades. It's unfair." C remained supportive but was more measured. He added softly, "You need to consider what's best for you. Not what they desire or what's best for them. What would you like? What am I looking for?" It's a straightforward question, but I'm having a terrible time coming up with a response. A part of me, the young child who constantly sought her parents' favor, longs to say yes and to be the decent daughter they never thought I was. However, the mature me, who has put a lot of effort into creating a life and identity apart from my family's shadow, is yelling no. I've devoted a significant portion of my life to proving my value to them, to being noticed, to being appreciated. And they want me to sacrifice everything now that I am at last living a life where I am respected and seen. To suspend my life. To tidy up the mess they created. I become more irate the more I consider it. I'm not being asked to join the family. They want me to be their guardian and caregiver. They want a promise that their issues would be resolved when they leave, not a relationship with me. I've made up my mind after spending hours discussing it with M and C. I will not be attending Thanksgiving. I will not act as their guardian. I refuse to allow them to drag me back into the dysfunction from which I have so desperately fled. It won't be simple, I know. I'm aware that there will be emotional manipulation and guilt trips. However, I am also aware that I am worthy of better. I should be able to live the life I have created for myself without having to deal with their disregard and demands. I will give my brother a call back tomorrow to inform him of my choice. After that, I'll send a letter to my parents outlining my reasons for not attending Thanksgiving and my inability to fulfill their wishes for me to be their guardian. Even though I know it's the correct thing to do, it will be difficult. I'm afraid. I'm depressed. I'm pleased with myself for finally putting my needs first and putting my own health ahead of their expectations, even if I still want things to be different. Thank you to everyone who left a remark on my previous post. During this trying time, your words of support and encouragement have been invaluable. After a lifetime of feeling invisible, it means more than you can imagine to feel seen and understood. After speaking with my family, I'll provide another update. Good luck to me. I suspect that I will require it. Update 2. I feel like I've aged years in a matter of weeks since my last update, which was around a month ago. My family's predicament has escalated in unexpected ways, and I'm still in shock over all that has transpired. I want to start by saying thank you to everyone who left a comment on my previous post. During a very trying period, your guidance and encouragement meant the world to me. I heeded your advice, and when I needed it most, it gave me the courage to defend myself. I declined the position of guardian for my siblings and chose not to attend Thanksgiving, as I said in my previous update. After calling my brother to inform him of my choice, I wrote a letter to my parents outlining my justifications. For a time at least, I believed that would be the end of it. I was mistaken. When I got home from work last week, my 70-year-old mother was waiting for me at the door. I was so shocked that I almost dropped my keys. She has never come to see me before. Not even when I bought my condo, when I got my major promotion, or when I moved into my first apartment, but here she was, standing at my door as if she had every right to be there, looking older and more worn out than I remembered. "Mom," I said, barely raising my voice above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" She took a while to respond. She simply stared at me, her gaze sweeping across my face as if she had never seen me before. Perhaps she was. When she eventually stated, "We need to talk." Her tone was forceful but gentle. "It's not good for your father. The physicians say." She trailed off, tears welling up in her eyes. I experienced a little twinge of guilt. I was unaware that my dad was ill. Then I realized that I hadn't known since they hadn't informed me. Because unless they require anything from me, they never tell me anything. I inhaled deeply, bracing myself. "I'm sorry to hear that," I added, trying to sound impartial. "But I don't see what that has to do with me." My mom's eyes became wide with surprise. "He's your dad," she cried out. "How can you say that?" "Is he?" The venom in my voice surprised me as I shot back. When has he ever acted like a father to me? I briefly believed my mother might try to enter when she moved forward. I remained steadfast in the doorway, preventing her from entering. I wasn't going to give her access to my personal space or the life I had created for myself. "Please," she begged, her voice adopting the guilty tone I so vividly recalled from my early years. You are necessary. I am unable to manage things on my own because your father is constantly in and out of the hospital. Your siblings? My siblings? I interrupted her. My siblings always. Mom, what about me? At what point did you need me for myself rather than what I could provide for everyone else? She gave me the impression that I had slapped her. That's not fair, she remarked. You have always been cherished by us. We have always supported you. I was unable to resist. I chuckled. The sound reverberated along the deserted corridor, loud and terrible. Are you there for me? When? You forgot my birthdays. When? When did you miss my final debate? When did you not attend my graduation from college? Please let me know exactly when you were there for me, Mom. I briefly had a surge of gratification when my mother's face crumbled. She was at last experiencing a small portion of the suffering I had endured for years. She said, "We did the best we could." With a broken voice. You have no idea how it was to attempt to keep everyone alive and well. There was no time for, I concluded. For me, for her. I wasn't ill, so you didn't have time for me. Since I wasn't creating issues, due to the fact that I was invisible. For a long time the burden of decades of unsaid hurt hung between us as we stood there in quiet. When my mother eventually responded, "I'm sorry," I briefly thought she was telling the truth. That's not how we intended to make you feel. You are loved by us. You are necessary to us. Come home, please. Assist us. My eyes pricked with tears, but I blinked them away. My family has brought me enough tears. I can't, I stated firmly. I refuse to. Now, Mom, I have a life of my own, one I created without you. I won't sacrifice that to serve as your contingency plan. Backup plan? She asked again, raising her voice. Do you believe this to be that? We are your family. I answered, no. And even I was astonished by how definitive my voice sounded. You aren't, no longer. I decided to choose my family. My friends, who have helped me, who have stood by me, who have seen me when you had no desire to look. With a look of disbelief and hurt on her face, my mother gazed at me. She remarked, so that's it. You're just going to turn your back on us? I gave a headshake. No, Mother. It's been a while since you abandoned me, I'm simply leaving at last. She didn't answer. Rather, she turned and strode off, her shoulders hunched in surrender. I was both relieved and saddened as I watched her leave. It seemed like the end of something. Possibly the loss of hope and the hope that my parents would one day see me and show me the kind of love I needed. That should be the end of it, I thought. I believed I had stated my stance clearly. However, as usual, life had other ideas. My brother called me a week following my mother's visit. His words, "My father passed away." I sat there looking at my phone, not sure if I should feel guilty, relieved or sad. The news seemed to be about a stranger rather than my own father, and I felt numb. According to my brother, the funeral is next week. Will you come? After closing my eyes and inhaling deeply, I answered, no, I don't think I will. The other end of the line was silent for a long time. My brother finally answered, I understand. And I was shocked to hear that he didn't sound judgmental. Take care of yourself, sis. I sat for a while after I hung up, reflecting about my early years, my father, and our unfulfilled connection. I recognized that I no longer needed his attention and praise after reflecting on all the times I had wanted for it. I've devoted a significant portion of my life to gaining my family's affection and attention. In actuality, though, I no longer require their approval. I am proud of the life I have created for myself. I have a career I'm enthusiastic about, friends who adore me, and a sense of self-worth independent of other people's opinions. The passing of my father feels like the end of a chapter, a depressing one, full of unmet words and lost chances. However, it's already over, and I can't alter it. I just have to keep going. I will not be attending the funeral. Neither my mother nor my siblings will be contacted. It's not because I'm angry or spiteful. I've moved on from it. It's just that I've come to the realization that I no longer belong in that environment. I've outgrown it. I want those who might criticize me for my choice to realize that it has nothing to do with forgiveness or the lack of it. It has to do with protecting oneself. It's about realizing that sometimes walking away is the healthiest course of action and that some relationships are too damaged to be repaired. I'm no longer upset. I'm not depressed. I'm just free from the burden of unmet expectations, free from the hurt of being ignored and underappreciated, and free to live my life as I see fit without the dysfunctional shadow of my family hovering over me. I want to express my gratitude to everyone who has followed my story and provided encouragement and guidance. During one of the most trying times in my life, your comments have given me courage and consolation. You've given me the confidence to advocate for myself and put my needs ahead of those of others. My last update will be this one. I'm concentrating on my future from now on, one that I can control and that is unencumbered by the burdens of my past. In some ways, it's frightening, but it's also quite freeing. I want to let everyone know that it's acceptable to make your own decisions, especially if they are in a similar circumstance, are having trouble meeting expectations from family, or feel unnoticed or underappreciated. Even if the ties are with family, it's acceptable to leave them if they are hurting you. You are worthy of being appreciated, seen, and loved for who you are. One final time, I want to thank you all for being the encouraging group of people I never had as a child. You can never know how much your understanding and kindness have meant. Now to the next story 5. I survived an accident, but my family's betrayal hurts more. 3 years of silence, lies, and a crossroads for reconciliation. I, 35F, am in dire need of some guidance. I spent weeks in the hospital following a horrific vehicle accident 3 years ago. After a drunk truck driver crashed into my automobile, I suffered a fractured arm and had to spend a lengthy time recovering to regain my ability to walk. Even though the accident wasn't my fault, I'm still extremely cautious when driving even 3 years after it happened. The problem is that because my sister had gone into labor, my relatives did not come to my aid or offer me support during this trying time. Ironically, when the tragedy occurred, it was my route to surprise her at the hospital. I was employed at a company a couple hours away from my hometown at the time. I made the decision to surprise my sister after I received a call from my parents informing me that she was in labor and being taken to the hospital. I drove off after borrowing a friend's vehicle. I had an accident on the way there and was taken to the closest hospital. My friends and coworkers were the main people that helped me during my recuperation. At first, I could see why my parents were too busy with my sister and her infant. My parents didn't check on me though, even days after my sister gave birth. I contacted them several times while falling in and out of consciousness, frantically asking staff if my parents had visited or called, despite the pain. Each time I encountered disappointment. My parents finally gave me a call about a week after the accident. However, they asked why I had been phoning them so much rather than how I was doing. They were with my sister, so apparently they had been ignoring my calls. Despite my surprise at their harshness, I inquired about my sister's and the baby's well-being. They didn't even ask how I was feeling. They just said that both of them were okay. My buddies told me that they had contacted my parents via every available channel to alert them of my accident. My parents didn't inquire about me though. In an attempt to raise some awareness, I disclosed the information myself. Rather, they acknowledged that they already knew but decided not to reply because they thought my sister's needs should come first. Why couldn't they even pretend to care? I asked. At that point, they admitted to deliberately ignoring me. They thought my sister's birth was more significant than my injury, which they said I caused myself. I couldn't understand. It was a drunk truck driver who caused the accident, not me. However, they made it clear that they weren't referring to the truck driver. They accused me of being irresponsible for choosing to drive at such a late hour. They argued it was still unnecessary for me to do such a thing and that I was solely responsible for the accident when I explained that I was actually driving to the hospital to be there for my sister. That was a truly awful and inconsiderate thing for them to say. I hung up on them without saying anything else because I was so angry. I later learned from the hospital personnel that my parents were the first people called when emergency services spotted me at the scene of the accident and dialed 911. They had declined to appear and even asked not to be contacted over it in the future. Because I had my employee ID on me, the hospital subsequently got in touch with my place of employment, which is how my friends and coworkers learned about it. Finding out that rescue personnel had not bothered to arrive after being notified that their daughter had been involved in a catastrophic accident was even more disheartening. Even though I was only attempting to support my sister and the family, their sole reaction to the situation was to hold me responsible for what transpired. After that episode, I came to the realization that my family had no interest in supporting me, even though I wanted to be there for them. After that, not even my sister had bothered to get in touch with me. I really gave up on my family after that episode, so I haven't spoken to them in 3 years. I believed that our connection was normal previous to the accident, but I had always felt that my sister and her priorities took precedence over me. This was verified in the worst conceivable way by the accident. To be clear, I wasn't angry that they didn't come see me while my sister was in delivery. I was disappointed that they didn't feel it was necessary to see me even after my sister had given child. My sister was unable to visit me in the hospital at the time, so I didn't even anticipate her doing so. For my parents, however, it was not impossible. My sister was looked after by her in-laws and fiancé. All I had were my friends, but I was fortunate that they were supportive. They paid for my medical bills and supported me during my recuperation. Although I have yet to repay them, I am immensely appreciative of their generosity and assistance. I doubt I'll ever be able to pay them back in full. My family hasn't made an effort to get in touch with me, despite the fact that the incident occurred 3 years ago. Many members of the extended family have asked me why we are no longer together, but I have kept the answer to myself. I believed we had an unwritten agreement to keep this from other family members, and I followed it. But things have changed recently. My parents had begun discussing the incident in a way that portrayed me as the villain, so one of my aunts got in touch with me. This occurred a few weeks ago when my sister's promotion at work was celebrated with a family dinner hosted by my parents. The subject of my alienation from the family was raised throughout the meal. My parents ultimately made the decision to discuss it after much back and forth. They no longer believed that they had to keep it a secret. However, they altered the details of what transpired following my accident when telling the story. A few facts were accurate. I got into a car accident on the way to the hospital, where I had planned to surprise my sister. They asserted, however, that they were never notified and learned of the tragedy only a few days later. They said that a lot of time had gone by the time they learned, and they were too busy taking care of my sister and the baby to consider the reason I hadn't been in touch with them earlier. Additionally, they stated that they called me as soon as they found out about the accident, but I was too distraught to talk to them. That was not accurate at all. They continued by saying they had made multiple attempts to get in touch with me, but I had consistently turned them down. They said they eventually stopped attempting to contact me. In essence, they framed the entire incident as a miscommunication and portrayed me as the bad guy who had been harsh on them for their lack of concern. Despite my parents' explicit orders not to, my aunt, being the kind person she is, chose to get in touch with me. They said they didn't want to make a big deal out of it, but I knew they were lying to me about what had happened because they didn't want me to know. According to my aunt, I hadn't spoken to my parents in 3 years, and they were truly missing me. She added that I was losing out on the chance to be my niece's aunt and that she herself wouldn't pass up the chance. She advised me to get in touch with my folks. I phoned her back to get more information since I was perplexed. I was astonished when she told me what my folks had stated. Although it had been the other way around, they had portrayed themselves as the victims and me as the egotistical villain. When I learned what they had been telling the family about what had occurred all those years ago, I became enraged. I made the decision to talk to my aunt and be honest with her. In case she didn't believe me, I even promised to connect her with my friends who had paid for my medical bills. I clarified that since my accident, my parents had lost all interest in me. Despite being contacted, they refused to be bothered. I informed her that I didn't even feel angry at them for putting my sister's needs first throughout her delivery, since I recognized how important that was. Their total disregard after that was what irritated me. My parents didn't bother to check on me after my sister had birth and was surrounded by her in-laws and fiancé. My aunt was astonished to hear my side of the story and expressed regret for having doubted me. I was glad she had talked to me, since I might not have known what my parents were talking about behind my back if she hadn't. I'm at a crossroads right now. Within the family, the truth about what transpired 3 years ago is beginning to surface. Numerous family members have contacted me to inform me that I had to tell my aunt about my experience. They claimed that I had every right to protect myself and that if I hadn't spoken up, my parents might have gotten away with their falsehoods. My parents' treatment of me was unfair and undeserved, and some family members have even begun to show sympathy for me, recognizing how terrible my experience was. In a way, I'm grateful to my aunt for hearing my side of the story and making sure my parents' version of events wasn't allowed to go unpunished. But this has also started to cause problems. The family started to distance themselves from my parents after they learned that I had spoken to my aunt and that she had told others the truth. They're now holding me responsible for the consequences. How any of this is my fault is beyond me. I only told my aunt, and even then, I only spoke the truth. It was she who made the decision to tell the other members of the family. My parents, however, are making me answerable for the results. In essence, they framed the entire incident as a miscommunication and portrayed me as the bad guy who had been utterly intolerant of their lack of concern. Despite being expressly told by my parents not to talk to me about this, my aunt, being the kind person that she is, chose to get in touch with me. I understood the true reason behind their assertion that they didn't want to make a big deal out of it. They didn't want anyone to talk to me because they didn't want me to discover that they had been lying about what actually occurred. 3 years had gone by since I last spoke to my parents, and my aunt called to let me know that they truly missed me. She claimed that I was losing out on the chance to be my niece's aunt, and she was aware that she wouldn't pass up such a chance. She therefore advised me to get in touch with my parents once more. I called her back and requested for additional information because I was so perplexed. I was startled when she told me what my parents had told them because they had framed me as the selfish villain and made themselves the victims, even though it had been the other way around. Hearing what they had told everyone in the family about what had transpired all those years ago infuriated me. I made the decision to talk to my aunt and be honest with her. In case she didn't want to trust me, I even offered to connect her with my friends who had paid for all of my costs. I was telling her the truth about what had actually occurred. I clarified that, following my injury, my parents were the ones that truly didn't give a damn about me. They simply did not want to be bothered, even though they had been approached. Since my sister was giving birth, which was also very important at the moment, I wasn't even upset with them for choosing to be there for her. Even so, I became irate when they failed to make the effort to come for me. Even my aunt seemed somewhat surprised when I explained this to her, and she apologized to me for having doubts about me. I was quite grateful that she had chosen to talk to me, since I doubt I would have ever learned what my parents were talking about behind my back. I'm at a crossroads right now. The family is beginning to come to terms with the reality of what transpired 3 years ago. Many individuals have been contacting me and telling me that it was vital for me to tell my aunt the truth. Otherwise, they claim, my parents could have gotten away with lying about what had transpired and painting me as the villain. Many family members have even begun to express sympathy for me, telling me that my parents should never have treated me that way and that what happened to me was truly terrible. They claim it was unjust and unworthy. In one sense, I owe my aunt a great deal for persuading others to listen to me and accept my version of events. If not, my parents' version of events would have been accepted. However, it has become rather problematic for me at the moment because the rest of the family began to turn away from my parents once they learned that I had discussed this with my aunt and that she had discussed it with others. Since all I did was tell folks the truth, I truly don't understand how any of this is my fault. I just told my aunt the truth, and she made the decision to tell everyone else. It would be inaccurate to even state that I told anyone the truth. In any case, they are blaming me for the current state of affairs because, at the moment, the family has essentially been avoiding them and no one wants to talk to them. This is bad because my niece's 3rd birthday, which also happens to be the 3rd anniversary of my injury, is being celebrated in a few weeks. They are currently worried that no one will show up for the birthday celebration now that the family has learned the truth. My niece is thrilled about her birthday celebration, and the whole family has been invited, so that will be somewhat disappointing. But as of yet, no one has replied to the invites, and some have already turned them down without even having to provide a reason. That's what's happening at the moment. My family hasn't spoken to me in 3 years, but they have reached out to me because of this circumstance. They have been attempting to call and text me nonstop. The majority of their messages accuse me of intentionally causing this problem in order to take my sister's attention, but I haven't answered any of their calls since I don't think it's relevant. My parents and even my sister seem to think that I'm intentionally doing this because I find it infuriating that they opted to be with my sister during her childbirth rather than with me. They believe that I'm taking retribution in this way. They even went so far as to affirm that they were certain I intentionally got into the automobile late that evening in order to gain attention. They said that because my sister was giving birth and receiving all of the family's attention, I was envious of her. That's such a cruel, awful thing to say. No matter how much I could despise someone, I can't even fathom thinking that way about them. It's awful to be implied that I intentionally created the disaster in order to get sympathy and attention from my family. Furthermore, they are accusing me of attention-seeking even now, claiming that they are aware that I couldn't bear it when I learned that my sister had gotten a promotion at work and was doing well in her life. They therefore think I made the conscious choice to bring up and negatively portray historical events. They knew exactly what they were attempting to do, so I don't even see why they would say something like that. The hypocrisy of their actions, which were just what they were accusing me of, infuriates me. Since they first attempted to get in touch with me, I have continued to block their numbers and disregard all of their messages. But I don't know what to do next. Do I have to confront them about their falsehoods? Do I have to keep ignoring them and let the family issue work itself out? For the sake of my niece, who is innocent in all of this, should I try to patch things up? I could use some guidance on how to deal with this chaotic family scenario because I'm terribly conflicted. First update. Since my last post, which was approximately 2 weeks ago, things have significantly become worse. Even though I'm still processing all that has transpired, I feel compelled to give you all this update. My folks unexpectedly dropped by my apartment a few days ago. After 3 years of no communication, I was startled to see them at my door. I initially believed they could have come to apologize, but I couldn't have been more mistaken. They began screaming at me as soon as I answered the door and accused me of purposefully attempting to damage their family's name. "How dare you spread lies about us," my father said, pointing his finger at me in a fit of rage. They refused to listen to me when I tried to clarify that I had just given my aunt the truth. My mother said that I was trying to punish them for supporting my sister throughout her delivery because I was jealous of her. They refused to leave when I ordered them to. My dad took a step forward, raising his voice. "You must clean up the mess you made. Because of the lies you've propagated, no one wants to go to your niece's upcoming birthday party." I lost it at that point. They were the ones who had been dishonest and had deserted me when I needed them most, I shouted back. My father stepped in the way when I attempted to shut the door. We were instantly engaged in a physical altercation as he pressed against the door. I gave him a hefty shove back in the heat of the moment. He staggered back, almost toppled over. I noticed a mixture of astonishment and horror in my mother's eyes as she yelled. We all remained there for a while, panting. The truth of what had happened beginning to set in. My father turned and remarked, "This isn't over," before they finally left. "You'll be sorry you did this." I sobbed after they were gone. I was crying and trembling from the shock of what had transpired. I've never been violent, so I was afraid that things had gotten to the point where they were physical. I was inundated with texts from different family members the following day. When my parents came to make peace, they apparently told everyone that I had attacked them brutally. I was portrayed by them as dangerous and unstable. I received texts from several family members who were disappointed since they thought they were real. Some, who were more dubious, contacted me to inquire about my version of events. I told people the whole truth and was honest with them. In a particularly nasty communication, my sister advised me to avoid her and her daughter. I feel confused and overburdened. Even if it was only a shove, I know I shouldn't have used physical force. However, I also feel as though I was forced into a difficult situation and had to respond to their violence. I'm concerned about the possible legal repercussions. Could they file assault charges? Do I need to report harassment? The family has never been more split. Some people are adamantly on my side, some are on my parents' side, and some are in the center, not knowing which side to believe. With individuals taking sides over whether or not to attend, the approaching birthday celebration for my niece has turned into a contentious issue. I struggle with guilt as well. Although I am aware that my parents' actions were wrong, I sometimes question whether I ought to have handled the situation differently. My emotional state is a complete mess, even though my logical side understands I was defending myself. All of this has been made possible by my friends' tremendous support. They've been taking turns checking in on me and have offered to let me stay with them if I feel insecure in my apartment. To help me deal with everything, the accident 3 years ago, my family's rejection, and now this confrontation, I'm thinking of going to therapy. My mental health is suffering as a result of everything. I've made the decision to update my email address and phone number for the time being. In case my parents try to visit, I've also let my employer know about the issue. From here, how do I proceed? Should I think about taking legal action to defend myself? What should I do with my relatives who now perceive me as the antagonist in this tale? And above all, how do I begin to recover from this trauma? Second update. About a week has passed since my last update, and somehow things with my family have gotten even more problematic. My niece's third birthday celebration, which ended up being a total bust, was the most important occasion. According to my aunt who was present at the celebration, just a small number of people attended, primarily members of my sister's close family and a few of her acquaintances. Because of the ongoing tension, the great bulk of the extended family decided to avoid it. From the beginning, the mood was extremely tight. My sister was about to cry, my parents were clearly under stress, and my niece kept inquiring about everyone's whereabouts. Things reached a breaking point halfway through the celebration when my mother sobbed and openly accused me of destroying everything and destroying the family. People who were more sympathetic to my side of the story and those who supported my parents got into a fight as a result. With all the yelling and bad vibes, my niece broke down in tears as well. After losing it, my sister yelled at everyone to leave, accusing them of ruining her daughter's birthday. The visitors shuffled awkwardly out as the party came to an abrupt stop. This makes me feel terrible. I feel guilty even though I know logically that I'm not to blame for this. I'm also upset that my parents continue to try to make me the bad guy in all of this. The family has never been more split. There are some in the middle who are fed up with the whole thing, while others are on my side and fully supporting my parents. Over the last 24 hours, I've gotten a variety of texts. While some family members have sent me heartfelt notes accusing me of being responsible for the party disaster, others have offered their support. In a particularly unpleasant email, my sister told me that she no longer considers herself to have a sister and that she never wants to see or speak to me again. I cannot describe how much those remarks stung. I still adore my sister and niece in spite of everything. I'm having trouble figuring out how to proceed from here. A part of me wants to get in touch with my sister and attempt to explain my position again, but another part of me questions whether it would be better to honor her desires and keep my distance, at least for the time being. I have no idea about my parents. I'm sick of the ongoing drama and suffering, but I also want to face them and force them to admit the harm they've caused. As suggested by many of you, I have been attending therapy sessions. Even if it's early, having a professional to discuss all of this with feels fantastic. She is trying to provide me with the skills I need to establish healthy boundaries with my family while also assisting me in overcoming my feelings of guilt and rage. One thing the therapist stated that truly resonated with me was that it's acceptable to put my own mental health and well-being first, even if it meant putting my family at a distance. She emphasized that I'm not accountable for my sister's or parents' behavior and that it is neither healthy nor normal. It's difficult, but I'm trying to take that seriously. Emotional manipulation and family dynamics that have existed for years don't go away quickly. I continue to question whether there was anything I could have done better or if there was a way to stop all of this from occurring. However, I then remind myself of the reality. That accident wasn't anything I asked for. I didn't ask for my family to leave me when I most needed them. Furthermore, I didn't invite them to come to my door and level charges or to misrepresent what had happened. When asked, I only told the truth. So what should I do next? I'm thinking of writing a letter to the entire family to express my truth one final time before removing myself from the matter, not to defend myself or level accusations. Perhaps things would settle down if I express my disinterest in carrying on with this drama. My niece is also on my mind. I wonder whether I should save money for my sister's future, even though she doesn't want me in their lives right now. Perhaps I should create a college fund or something she can use as she gets older. How can all of this bring me peace? How can I emotionally safeguard myself while still maintaining the possibility of future reconciliation? And how can I get over my guilt about something I didn't cause? I appreciate your support, everyone. Having a location where I can discuss all of this and receive unbiased feedback matters more than you can imagine. For now, I'm going to concentrate on getting better and taking things one day at a time, but I'll keep you informed of any significant developments. Third update. About a week has passed since my last update, and I'm still getting used to all that has transpired. I appreciate all of your ongoing help and guidance. The most significant event is that yesterday, I got an email from my parents. When I saw it in my inbox, I was taken aback. I didn't think I'd hear from them after all this time, especially after the disastrous birthday celebration. An apology opened the email. Both in the immediate aftermath of my injury 3 years ago and in the more recent altercations, my parents admitted that they had handled the matter badly. They acknowledged that they should not have disregarded my cries for assistance and that they had erred in putting my sister's needs ahead of their own when I was in the hospital. They also expressed regret for coming to my apartment and starting a physical altercation. My father acknowledged that his harsh behavior was inappropriate and expressed sincere regret for it. They also acknowledged that they had misled the family about what had occurred. They claimed to be embarrassed of what they had done and to have come to see the harm their falsehoods had done to the whole family, not just to me. The email clarified that they had learned their lesson from the tragic birthday party. They realized the seriousness of their acts after witnessing the division in the family and the impact they had on my niece. They claimed that after reflecting deeply for the previous week, they had come to the conclusion that it was time to take responsibility for their errors. I had a range of emotions after reading this email. I felt a mixture of emotions, including a sense of vindication, anger at the length of time it had taken, and a glimmer of optimism that perhaps we could save our relationship. Mostly though, I felt torn. I've been waiting for this apology for the past 3 years. They appear to be taking full responsibility for their conduct, and it looks honest. However, I can't help but question whether it's too little, too late. An email cannot quickly undo years of suffering and betrayal because of the deep-seated grief they have inflicted. A request to meet in person to discuss the matter was made at the end of the email. They stated they hope that one day I'll be willing to give them an opportunity to make amends face-to-face, but they understand if I'm not ready for that. I still haven't replied. While I'm afraid of exposing myself to additional hurt, I also want to agree to meet them to see if there's any chance of repairing our friendship. I had a physical argument with them the previous time I saw them. After talking with my therapist about the email, she advised me to take my time answering. If I do choose to meet, she advised, it could be beneficial to do so in a neutral setting, perhaps with a mediator in attendance. In addition, my sister and niece have been on my mind. According to my parents' email, they have been honest with my sister about what transpired and have urged her to get in touch with me. I haven't heard from her yet. Even though I really miss her and my niece, I understand that I must give them space for the time being. It seems that my parents have apologized for their lies and explained the matter in a mass email to the rest of the family. Some family members have messaged me to give their support and to express their amazement at the news. I'm at a crossroads now. Should I strive to mend our relationship after accepting my parents' apology? Do I keep my distance for my own psychological well-being? Is it possible for me to appreciate their efforts without completely reintegrating them into my life just yet? In addition, I'm struggling with my own sense of duty and guilt. There is a part of me that questions whether I could have handled things differently, even though I know rationally that I'm not to fault for this circumstance. I'm making an effort to concentrate on my own recovery and development going forward. To help control my stress and anxiety, I've started mindfulness meditation and am still in treatment. I've also been considering changing my life for the better. I'm thinking about looking for a new job, maybe in a different city, to give myself a fresh start and some physical separation from all of this drama, not to escape my troubles. I have made the decision to establish a college fund for my niece. It seems like the appropriate thing to do, regardless of whether my sister wants to stay in touch with me. Perhaps when she's older, she'll realize how much I've always loved her. From here, how do I proceed? How can I strike a balance between the need to emotionally safeguard myself and the prospect of reconciliation? And with all of this, how can I begin to reconstruct my life and identity? Once again, I want to thank everyone for their support along this trip. For me, your counsel and encouraging remarks have been invaluable. Although I have no idea what the future will bring, knowing that this community is supporting me makes me feel a little more prepared to face it. Now to the next story 6. X ignores our kids for his stepkids, blames me for their distance. Am I the asshole for saying they're justified in feeling fatherless? Original. I'm 33 and have 2 kids, 12 and 8. I divorced their dad when I discovered he was cheating on me with a mom from our younger son's school group. Despite that betrayal, I agreed to shared custody because I wanted my kids to grow up with their father in their lives. However, since the divorce, he's only been around when he's picking them up for visits. He often goes out with his stepchildren but rarely includes our kids, claiming those outings are spur of the moment and can't always include them. Eventually, I stopped pushing, but I've always thought it was unfair that he keeps his distance from our children's lives. Recently, I decided to upgrade my older son's computer, and he asked if we could give his old one to his cousin, my brother's son. My brother has been a huge support for my kids. He's always available to take them to their school events when I can and often takes them out to the park or for trips when I'm busy. My ex, on the other hand, is rarely available for them. Anytime I ask him to help with an activity, he has an excuse. He's out of town or swamped with work. Ironically though, whenever his stepkids need something, he's there. Once he even argued with the stepkid's father at a school event, insisting he had the right to be there. When my ex found out I gave the computer to my nephew, he got upset. He complained that if I had money to spare on a gift like that, I should have forgiven 2 months of child support he'd missed, since his finances were tight with a new baby. He added that if I could give away a computer, I should have gifted it to either his kids or his stepkids, who share just one computer among the 3 of them. I told him my finances were none of his business and that I owed nothing to his stepchildren. Then his wife jumped into the conversation, accusing me of spoiling my son by giving him a new computer and of being petty for letting my son bring it to their house, claiming it was just to show off in front of his step-siblings. I told her she had no right to speak to me that way or question my decisions. I added that I allow my kids to see their father so they can grow up with him in their lives, not so she can interfere with how I parent. My ex was offended, but I told him this whole situation could have been avoided if his wife hadn't inserted herself where she doesn't belong. After that, things seemed to calm down until last week. I went to pick up the kids, and my ex was visibly upset. He explained that he'd tried reading a bedtime story to our youngest. At home, he still likes to be read to before bed, usually by me, his brother, or my brother, and when none of us are around, he listens to audiobooks. Apparently, my ex wanted to make an effort to connect, so he offered to read to him, but our son turned him down, saying he didn't need him for that because he could do it himself. My ex stayed to listen as he searched for a story for 8-year-olds without a dad, on his tablet, and it hit him hard. The next day, my ex offered to take our older son to basketball practice, but he replied that he'd be going with his dad. He quickly corrected himself and said uncle. That made my ex even angrier, and when I came to pick up the kids, he confronted me about it. I told him that if our kids feel like they don't have a father, he has only himself to blame. He tried to shift the blame onto me, saying I was the one pushing him away from his role. I told him it's up to him to show up for his kids, not something I can do for him. I reminded him he was the one who broke our family, and he's chosen to be more involved with his stepkids than with his own children. I told him not to kid himself. The kids are growing up and they're starting to see the reality of who he is as a father. If he keeps this up, he can't expect much from them in the future. After that exchange, his mom called me. While she's always been polite to me, I felt the need to say that I would have appreciated this same concern from her when she supported her son's affair, knowing her grandchildren were losing their father in the process. She hung up and we haven't spoken since. My brother advised me that I had every right to express how I feel, but he suggested that maybe this discussion shouldn't have happened in front of the kids. Later, my ex texted me saying that if I weren't so difficult, he'd spend more time with them. I told him his duty as a father doesn't depend on whether I'm easy or not, and he knows I've never prevented him from seeing the kids. The truth is, when he has to choose, he prefers outings with his stepkids over his own children, and that's something only he can change. Comments. Lap steel guitar. You can only do so much, OP, and don't let him off the hook for any child support. The fact that it's stretching his budget is a him problem, not a you problem. And I agree with your brother that conversation should not have happened in front of the kids. But, if I understand correctly, your ex chose the time and place, not giving you much choice in the matter. NTA Amazing Reserve 9089, I love how if she had extra money, she should forgive child support, but him already knowing money was tight wasn't a reason to not have another kid. Ancient Wishbone 4621, my ex stayed to listen as he searched for a story for 8-year-olds without a dad on his tablet. Pfft, your kid is ruthless. Good for him. NTA Judgment. NTA Update. 11 days later. These past days have been a bit unusual. First, I want to thank all of you. I didn't expect to receive so much advice, and I never thought this app would be so useful. It's not very popular in my country. Now, back to the topic. My ex sent me messages saying he wanted to resolve things, stop arguing and talk to me. I agreed. He came to my house, and we didn't beat around the bush, we went straight to the point. He asked me if I really thought he was a bad father. I replied that, looking back now, I never would have chosen him to be the father of my children. He said it wasn't easy for him, and I answered that it wasn't easy for me either because I take on both his role and mine. He told me he couldn't leave his stepchildren without a father because he had already broken their family, and I replied that he had left his own children without a father. He started crying and told me it was my fault, saying that when the infidelity happened, I refused to forgive him or go to couples therapy. I kept telling him things I'll admit they weren't kind, but none of them were lies. He asked me if, given his current state, I didn't feel sorry for him, and I said no. He told me he didn't think I could be so cruel, and I replied that when I changed jobs, pulled my kids out of school 2 months before the end of the term, moved houses and watched him disappoint our kids over and over again, any empathy I might have felt turned into apathy. He left after that. His mother called me and said she knew what I had told her son, that he hadn't stopped crying, and that she didn't understand how I could carry so much hatred to hurt her son like that. She said I should just get over it. I answered, with all due respect, what I said wasn't out of hatred but out of truth. If your son is crying, it's because he's finally facing the consequences of his actions. Maybe instead of worrying about how he feels now, you should have taught him to take responsibility and treat people with respect. She said I didn't know what it was like to feel a mother's love and see a child suffer, and I replied that I did understand because I have 2 children who cry over a living father. 2 children who see their dad being a father to other kids when he doesn't have time to be their father. She said he was sorry and I told her not to put words in his mouth and to stop calling me about anything related to her son. I hung up. I wanted to cry so badly, but I'm a damned mother, and I don't have time for that. I want my kids to feel safe, loved, and strong enough not to need anyone, not even me, to be themselves. Last Thursday, I took my kids to their cousin's birthday party, hosted by my ex-sister-in-law. I still have a good relationship with her. She was the one who told me about the infidelity and that her mother was already encouraging it. My ex showed up alone and irritated. My kids kept their distance from him. They kissed his hand but then ignored him completely. My ex-mother-in-law told the kids they should show more respect to their father, and my eldest replied that he doesn't show respect for me since he and his partner talk badly about me. I scolded my son, not for what he said but for how he addressed his grandmother. I told him it was wrong to eavesdrop on private conversations and repeat them. Then I asked him to gather his things because we were leaving. My ex-mother-in-law asked me not to leave, saying the kids were having fun and we could resolve this as adults. She asked my ex what he had said and he claimed not to remember. I told her I didn't care and she said we should be good parents. I replied that to be good parents, you need to be good people first. My ex was getting agitated. My ex-mother-in-law asked why we couldn't have a civilized co-parenting relationship. I told her everything I've mentioned here about his free will to see the kids and how the second custody agreement isn't working since he only sees them some weekends. My ex didn't want to discuss it, saying he had too many kids at home. My ex-mother-in-law told him the only kids who should feel comfortable are his, and the comfort of the others should be provided by their biological father. My ex wanted to end the conversation because his mother was scolding him for being a careless father. He also said it was my fault. I asked him to clarify how it was my fault. You can see the kids whenever you want, what more do you want? He started yelling, claiming I was only being petty because I didn't really need the money since I earned more than him and had fewer kids to feed. I told him I wouldn't continue the conversation and that I'd show him what being uncivilized looks like by filing for the overdue child support payments. His mother asked what I meant by overdue payments. I explained that he was 3 months behind. She was furious, slapped him, and demanded to know what he had done with the money for his children. He answered, I couldn't let JR miss out on attending the same school as my son. I didn't want him to feel inferior. My ex-mother-in-law said she couldn't believe it, and they started arguing. I left. Yet for context, my youngest son attends a private school, and my ex pays for his stepson to attend the same school. Yesterday, my ex-mother-in-law came over and said she would pay the overdue fees. She brought the money in cash. I knew my ex would be furious. Here's some context. My ex-mother-in-law doesn't work, doesn't own anything herself, and lives with my ex-sister-in-law. However, she does have significant savings from her inheritance. If she pays the tuition, my ex knows there won't be much left for him when she passes, even though she's still healthy. He's been asking her for years to invest some of that money in his business ideas, but she's always refused. My ex's retaliation was not picking up the kids this weekend. Yesterday, my ex-sister-in-law called me. She doesn't know all the details yet, but apparently, my ex's 15-year-old stepson punched him in the mouth. She said she'll let me know exactly what happened once she finds out. And before anyone asks, the new custody agreement will likely take a year to finalize. The court says the overdue payments are the priority, and the rest can wait. We have more urgent cases. Comments Snoo Woofers 496. At least his mama finally got some fucking sense. Her son is a piece of shit. Glassgirl 1021. He obviously fed her a line of bullshit when she was defending him. Welcome 7940. When the evil mill turns on her spoiled child, you know he was 100% wrong. It's not even a question of perspective anymore. Unusual Potato 1515. The chef's kiss was being punched by the stepson he prioritizes his own kids over. Bet he feels utterly ridiculous now. Update, 1 day later. A promise is a promise. As I mentioned earlier, my ex's stepson had an altercation with him because my ex refused to let him go out. Now I have more details. My ex's stepson had plans to go bowling with some friends. His biological father had already given him permission and money for the outing. However, when he told his mother, she said he couldn't go because they needed him to stay home and watch his younger siblings. My ex and his wife had planned an outing and needed someone to stay with the kids. This led to an argument. The boy raised his voice to his mother, and my ex stepped in to demand that he respect her. The boy replied that he wasn't his father. Trying to maintain authority, my ex told him that as long as he lived under his roof, he had to follow his rules. The boy ignored him and turned away. My ex followed him and touched his shoulder to get his attention. At that moment, the boy turned around, punched him, and shouted that he wasn't his father and could never compare to him. The mother scolded him for his behavior, but the boy, still angry, shouted back that he hated her. This version was shared by my ex and his wife to my ex-mother-in-law. My sister-in-law later relayed it to me. They went to see my ex-mother-in-law to try to gain her sympathy and convince her to take care of the kids, the 2 stepchildren and the baby so they could go out. However, my ex-mother-in-law told them she would not take care of the children. When I spoke to my ex, he mentioned he was dealing with family issues and claimed that the boy's biological father was turning him against him. He didn't give me many details and omitted most of what my sister-in-law had shared. He simply informed me that, due to the situation, he wouldn't be able to pick up our children this weekend. The 15-year-old boy is now staying with his biological father. As for what I mentioned earlier, my ex was 2 months behind on child support, and that same week, he was supposed to make another payment. He didn't, leaving him 3 months behind. In the end, his mother was the one who covered the overdue amount. Regarding the child who attends the same school as my son, it's not the 15-year-old involved in the altercation. It's his younger stepbrother, who is 8 years old, the same age as my son. I decided to enroll my son in that school when the affair became public. At the time, I was working as a kindergarten teacher at the same school, and the boy had been one of my students. We all knew each other, And to protect my children from rumors, I transferred them to a private school. This happened 2 months before the school year ended. Thanks to the circumstances and the support of some kind people, we managed to get them admitted. Comments. G-Drum 123. So even after the punch and the argument they still wanted to go out? What a pathetic excuse for parents. I hope their marriage eventually falls apart. Carolina Mama, 2015. Only did they want to go out, but it's funny how he had money to take his new wife out but not pay child support for his 2 bio children. Whatever, 53,143. I think it's funny that because of the altercation he said he couldn't take his own children for the weekend. So the 15-year-old was right, the man would never compare to the kid's father. The kid's own father is a better man. Libra Harper Serene. A true father would prioritize his children's needs, especially during a conflict. Instead, he uses the situation to avoid his responsibilities. Now to the next story 7. My 35M mother's, 58M, new fiancé wants me to call him dad. He's 24. How do I navigate this? Please buckle in because this is all so weird. I'm a 35-year-old man and for some backstory my dad died when I was 19, leaving my mom with me and my 2 siblings. I'm the oldest. It took some time but eventually my mom started dating again. We don't live together per se but our house is back onto each other and have a gate so it's pretty common for her to offer to do my laundry or me just go over for dinner or go look after our dog, that kind of stuff. Plus me and my siblings go over there for dinner every other Friday night or so. A bit after she started, the men she's been dating have been getting younger and younger and I've never had a problem with them. She's been very open to me and my siblings that she wants to get married again and we've always been supportive. At least after the initial shocks lol. The latest guy is by far the most serious and they've been dating since around last June. He proposed at the start of autumn and they want to get married next summer. Again, me and my siblings are fine with this because it's her life and we trust him. He's a nice guy and they clearly love each other. But anyway. So long and short is, this weekend, her fiancé, let's call him Phil, calls me and asks me if I could come over. I say yeah sure, I'll be over after work and I assumed he just needed help with some DIY stuff they're doing. When I get over there he calls me sport, and says we need to talk. I should mention this is something he does to me and my little brother, calling us things like kid, sport, scout, little buddy, or my personal favorite, calling us red and blue, seemingly out of nowhere. My brother is 30 by the way. He tried it with my little sister, 28, once and called her princess once but he stopped when she just stared at him. The thing with Phil is that he reminds me a lot of Charlie Day's character in Horrible Bosses in that his sole ambition has always been to meet a girl, get married and have a family. When he told me and my brother this, my brother made some joke about how maybe our mom's going to come short on the last part, and he got very upset but they made up after. Anyway, so I go round and I ask if my mom's around and he says no, it's just him and that we really need to talk man to man. I say sure, and he starts talking about how he's always wanted to be a father etc. And raise a son to call his own and then he drops this bombshell by saying, now I know I can never replace your father, the man who made you, but it would mean the world to me if you could call me dad. I'll admit it. I sniggered a little. And then I knew he was serious because he looked like he was about to cry. And he didn't drop it either. I asked if he really meant it and he got really emotional and started talking about what it means to be a man, and how his purpose is to have and provide for a family and he wants me and my siblings to be part of that family. Like he reiterated he'll never replace my father. And this did rub me the wrong way a bit. But he's ready to step up and be my dad and provide for and protect me and my siblings. And I'm just sitting there thinking, dude, I'm a decade older than you and live in a separate house. I don't need providing for, and even if I did, I don't think a guy a third of my age who works part-time at the hardware store and is into collecting manga is the man to do it. No offense if you're into that lol, just... I don't know, I was a bit taken aback. I was in shock so just said okay, and he gets emotional again but in a happy way talking about how he wants to go camping or go to a baseball game. I don't even like baseball LMAO, and how he joined the Lions this year and how he wants to bring me into it too as his boy, which just feels so surreal, even more so as I'm a Shriner. So all this talk of service and charity isn't the brag he thinks it is, because again I'm 10 years older than this guy. Well, I ended it by just saying, this has gotten a bit too weird and I was going home. He got very upset and I left, called my brother and he agreed it sounds weird as fuck. Later my mom called me and she wasn't disappointed but admitted it's made him very upset and depressed. I told her that if he's embarrassed, he doesn't need to be. I get he's excited about the marriage and we can just laugh this off as a funny story. She then said that wasn't what he was upset about. He, and she too a bit, is upset about the fact he poured his heart out and I rejected him. She said yeah, it is a bit kooky, but this is how he proves to himself he's a man, and I guess I was a bit angry and said something like, first off, it's not my job to certify what's between his legs, and second, this doesn't prove he's a man, it just proves he's a nut job. I apologized immediately, but she said she didn't want to hear it and hung up. She called back 10 minutes later and we apologized, and she begged me to just go along with it until he has some kids to call his own. I won't go too much into the details here, but she sort of let slip they plan to try IVF treatment because she's not ready to give up on being a mom just yet. And while I have my own thoughts about whether or not that's a good idea, I'm not here to litigate on that. We finished up fine and I reiterated I'd support her, and she agreed that it was definitely a stressful situation for me but begged me to at least think about it. Which leads me here. I did think it over, and obviously I'm going to say no. I had a dad and he died, rest in peace Dad. And that's the only dad I've ever needed, I've ever wanted, and I'll ever bestow that title on. I'm not asking if someone's unreasonable or what I should do, more so what I should say. This clearly means a lot to him for some reason, and I deeply love my mom, so I want to try and minimize the damage. Especially as we're still so involved in each other's lives and they live behind me. How can I make it clear to them, as painlessly as possible, that I think this is weird and borderline offensive? I really don't want to rip the band-aid off because I fear what it might do to the family. Edit. Showed my brother the post and he laughed so hard he started coughing LOL, then said we should call him Dr. Phil, and each other blue and red, so swap the nicknames he gave us around. Thoughts? Edit 2. As people were asking, he has no access to my mom's money or anything like that. She rents the house and it came pre-furnished and otherwise has no real assets. She doesn't make a lot of money anyway, so there's no pecuniary motive we could think of. Relevant comments. Raven Dorcombe. I wonder if he grew up without a dad. He's giving a weird 1950s energy to this whole thing that feels like he only knows about dads from seeing them on the telly. OOP, oh no, his dad's still alive, both his parents are, I've met them. They definitely feel odd about the whole situation but go along with it for his sake. So I felt dizzy. It seems your mom and her fiancé may have found each other while both in deeply vulnerable states, and so your instinct to keep being there for them may be right. A vulnerable person asking is different to a regular situation. Would calling him PA be a compromise? Or Step? Or Skip? Some version of his first name such as Coach Tom or Chief Wayne? If so, perhaps ask him if that would be okay with him. Maybe just a nickname that his own may be recognition enough of his relationship with your mom. Edit. I now think Op should get help with how to navigate this, and possibly brain scans for them. Op lives next door and I was asking for ideas to keep the peace for now because of the lad's depression. It turned out to be much stranger than I had thought. OOP, the thing is it became apparent it's more than just a name to him. He explicitly wants to do father-son activities with me and my brother with him as the dad, despite the fact we're both older than him. Sweet Peppa this. Like of course he feels like a child in this relationship and family. He's not going to feel like a man of the house in this situation. He's very unlikely to get his own child. So why is he sticking around? OOP. Me and my siblings all think he has issues talking to girls his own age. And so it led to this. Moa 711. I would have laughed then said, no kiddo, start over, because this isn't how this is going. I also get you're supporting your mom, but maybe question her having a kid at 58. Like, does she plan to be around for graduation? Marriages? Grandkids? It sounds like your mom is having some empty nest issues and is illogically trying to start over. If she got pregnant today, she would be approximately 77 years old when her kid graduated. Considering she hasn't even started trying yet, that means she will be in her 80s when the kid graduates. That isn't realistic. Also, I have a 5 and 7-year-old and am only 38 years old and already feel tired all the time. I can't imagine what a 58-year-old would feel like. OOP. Yeah, I'm gonna be honest, I don't actually see this ever going ahead, hence why I'm happy to say yeah, of course I'll support you, because I guess I just can't imagine, push comes to shove, her actually getting the treatment greenlit. I did raise the age stuff and she just said, people live a lot longer these days. Rick Russell TX, you just need to straight up tell him no. You can couch it with encouragement. You appreciate that he cares about your mother, etc., but just hit him with a hard no. Don't negotiate over it, there is nothing to be gained here by trying to give him a soft landing. Anything other than a firm no is just feeding his delusion, and I believe that once he gets a concession, he's going to start making more demands. I don't know what his endgame is here, if it's a mental health problem, or he's trying to create some legal precedent that he intends to exploit later, but it doesn't matter. You don't need to explain, defend, or justify this decision. OOP, the endgame? I genuinely think he wants to start a family or at least pretend he's the dad of one. Ever since we met him, it's all he'd ever really go on about, and how he needs to be a dad to become a man. Very early on he asked me if I ever planned to have kids, and I said no, and he got quite taken aback, like a mixture of offense and confusion, and sort of seemed to imply I'm either gay, I am but or trans because I don't want to be a man then. Murky perceptions. Hope it works out in the long run, but I was laughing so hard by the end. Such a crazy situation. I think you should talk with your mom and maybe hang out with her fiancé, but as bros, not some weird dad situation. OOP, I have offered this. But every time me and my brother do, he definitely tries to act like the man of the group or sets us up for more explicit father-son activities, or just talks about how desperate he is to be a father. A personal favorite was a time when he got his phone out and started reading some pearls of wisdom he'd obviously found online. Trapped in the suburbs. Yeah, she probably hasn't even been to a doctor, and is just imagining an unrealistic future based on internet articles and Hallmark Lifetime movies. Based on OP's description of the couple's finances, they wouldn't be able to afford IVF even if it was possible. OOP, yeah, she's not seen a doctor, this is purely stuff they've planned to do in the future. They've never mentioned money, and my sister is worried that they'll ask us to pay for it. Update, 4 days later. Original post and slightly amended the title for clarity. Anyway, so I told both my siblings and we agreed we'd collectively put our foot down with Phil at our next family dinner next week. Especially after an incident where Phil referred to my brother as sport, and asked if he wanted to go see a baseball game with him. Admittedly, I was a bit spurred on by what you all said and got involved, pinging him back with "Oh no tickets for me daddy," and my brother responded with "Daddy wants to me all to himself, hot," and Phil took a few minutes to respond before saying he was shocked, speechless and disgusted. He then messaged me in private to say he was utterly appalled, and that he'd never disrespect his own father the way you boys did. I kind of lost it at this point and said, "Right, that's because you're not my father, Phil. You're a 24-year-old man-child dating my mother. You have no right to my respect, especially not to the respect a father gets." I immediately said sorry, but then blocked his number and left the group chat. Apparently he sent a similar thing to my brother, who responded with more daddy stuff, and Phil blocked him. Well, that aside, I don't think that family dinner is going ahead. After the original post blew up, it seems someone from his Lions Club found it and reported it to their chair or whatever, and Phil has either been expelled or resigned or in the process of one of the two. He has removed nearly all mentions of the Lions from his social media and no longer mentions being a member, with his last post on it being some cryptic goodbye post where he kinda drones on about what it means to be a man in the modern day and the duty of fatherhood bestowed on all men at birth. Really weird shit. My mom called me half in a panic, half in a rage after, about the stuff I'd been telling about him before breaking down and saying we need to meet, which we did and got my brother to go over too. I know he has temporarily moved back in with his parents in the next town over, but from my understanding they still want to go ahead with the wedding, but I think that's more so because they've already spent money on it. When she said she was determined to have more kids, plural, my brother did step up and asked if she really thought that was a good idea at her age, and I pointed out that assuming she had the baby next year, and she lived to 80, they still wouldn't have finished college. She just stammered on about how people live longer these days, before breaking down crying and admitting she's not ready to give up on mothering due to some deep-seated trauma and fears about the family breaking apart that I won't go into for her sake. When we reassured her that we weren't going anywhere, she calmed down and we had a very good honest conversation where she's agreed to drop the IVF stuff on the grounds that it'd be too expensive and unlikely to get greenlit, but she's still adamant it's scientifically possible and she should be allowed to do it from an ethical standpoint because she has to win that argument. However, and has agreed to look into fostering instead. Me and my brother highly doubt anything will ever come of that, so we're not that worried anymore. The very good news is she's also agreed to look into therapy, psychiatric help to deal with her trauma, and we've helped get her in touch with a nice lady in town to unpack all this in a more healthy way. So at least one person is getting the help they need. I have no idea what's happened with Phil or what's going to happen with him, but I did make it clear to my mom that he is not my dad, he's not even my stepdad, I'm not a kid. And he's never going to be either one outside of legal fuckery. She relented pretty quickly. I think she's finally broken out of her shell at least, and we've agreed that if things go ahead that's going to be a huge red line though. I don't know if he'll want to be friends with me after all this LMAO. Anyway, thanks for the help on the original post, y'all. Edit, bit of an update, as I can't respond to everybody, but I think the marriage is off. Phil has gone AWOL again and has had a huge argument with his family as they've demanded he call off the wedding and date people his own age. This apparently made him snap. Me and my mom have met his mom and older brother who said Phil is very insecure around girls his own age and has never been able to talk to them, hence his preference. This very deeply upset my mom, and after some begging from all of us, she has agreed to push the wedding back, though she wants to keep dating him. I have no idea where Phil is, though his brother assumes he's couch surfing with his D&D friends who have been sending me and my brother some not so nice messages because clearly we're just jealous of the MILF hunter. If any of you socially inept fucks are reading this, I don't need to chase middle-aged folk because I can talk to boys my own age like a normal person. Peace. Now to the next story 8. I loved my best friend for years, but it nearly broke me. Here's how I finally moved on after a 5-year journey. Original post. Honestly, this is pretty straightforward. We met about 2 years ago and I instantly had a crush on the guy. I honestly thought our first few nights out were dates, up until the point he went on a rant about a girl he had a crush on after a few beers. At that point, my thought process was pretty much, okay, not dates, got it, and moved on with the intent of friendship. Except funny thing, turns out he checks all my boxes. I've never gotten along with anyone this well. People are shocked to find out, or well, not anymore, but up until about a year after we became friends, we haven't known each other for years and years. We have the same humor, like the same games and TV shows, agree on politics, want the same things in life, all well enough to get along, but still with enough differences that we can have conversations about it. We discover bands together, we help each other with work and writing papers. I call him when I'm sad and we both think it feels weird to not see each other for a week. Problem is, I'm completely head over fucking heels in love with the man and it is starting to get to the point where I don't know what to do. I thought it'd go away, but every time I meet him it's like I'm falling all over again. My friends have gone from teasing me about it to shooting me pitying looks whenever his name is brought up. My sister wants me to just stop seeing him. I go a week without talking to him and I think I'm starting to get over it, but whenever I see him again, it all comes rushing back. I don't know what to do. It hurts and it's not fun anymore. I've been on dates with some amazing guys who like me, but my feelings for my friend are stopping me from falling for someone else. It's starting to feel pathetic and at this point I see no good option. He's my best friend, the best I've ever had, and I just don't want to lose him. At this point I think asking him out would achieve that, since it's been so long since we met. I know the only way, for me personally, to get over someone is to stop seeing them, but I don't want to lose my best friend. The finishing touch keeping me on the hook are these looks he gives me. I've had other friends confirm he does this, because I was honest to God starting to think I was losing my fucking mind. Whenever we're out in a group, at a party or the pub, whenever I look over at him, it seems he's always looking at me. And these eye contacts last way too long to be normal. Like, a good 6-7 seconds of us just looking at each other across the table, or the room, or the bar. And he does this little smile. I've never seen it in any other situation. I don't know what it means. I have no idea why we do this or how it came to be, but it's the final fucking nail in this coffin of hopelessness I'm buried in right now. I don't know if I'm crazy and over-interpreting things, which is very likely, or if I should just give it a shot and ask him out, even though it might ruin the friendship, or just stop seeing him, or to just carry on and hope this feeling goes away at some point of the distant future. I'm so frustrated I want to cry. And have cried. A lot. I just don't know what to do here. TLDR, I'm in love with my best friend. It has become a huge problem in my life. When we've been drinking, he keeps looking at me in a way I'd describe as smitten, if it were any other person. I don't know what to do to get out of this hole of constant heartbreak and misery, and how to be able to move on to other guys. Update. So, hello. A little over 5 years ago I made a post on this subreddit looking for advice on how to handle my incredibly painful unrequited love for my best friend. I'd honestly forgotten about this until making a password reset on another account, and saw Tobbs 13 among my email search results. But as I read through the post, I remember how very comforting and terrifying the responses to my post was, being a more or less unanimous ask him out that scared my ass to death. Sorry that this isn't really a happy update, but I don't know. It felt weird seeing something I wrote in what feels like a different life and the people who responded seemed so genuinely kind and trying to help. I feel like I weirdly owe some kind of update. Especially for that one, dear, sweet commenter whose account is now deleted. I wish I had a way to reach out to them, because that was one of the most thoughtful comments I think I've ever gotten. And just to recap, with hindsight, I really was in love with this man and I had been for about 2 years. Like, full 9 yards in love. Struggling to breathe when he talked about someone else but still cheering him on because he deserved happiness levels of in love. If that sounds a bit like obsession to you, then that's because it probably was. The thing about unrequited love, the thing that really sucks about it is that it's incredibly hard to move on from. But until you do move on, your brain keeps obsessing about it to the point where it can be impossible to get anything done. It had been 2 years of that when I made that post, 2 years of pining and pain and an ever-growing pile of crushed hopes, and I think I was going a little bit insane, constantly swinging between butterflies and love highs when I was with my friend and the crushing feeling of rejection every time he'd say goodbye. And the obsession over things like how long he'd look at me. How long he'd let a hug last. How fast he'd respond to my texts, things which could either make or break my entire day depending on what the answer was. On to the actual update, after that primer. About a month and a half or so after I made that post, still trying to hype myself up to actually ask this man out, I accidentally became a head organizer for an event at the university I was studying at for the moment. Long story short, the person managing me was not kind. I was extremely overworked from the event on top of writing a thesis. I was equally stressed out in my private life due to the whole situation with my best friend, and I ended up going through a pretty severe case of burnout. Add on to everything that I'd developed an addiction to alcohol to try to handle everything, and was also experiencing what was most likely a drug-induced paranoid psychosis, and I was a mess. I ended up moving back in with my dad in September, and spent about a year doing nothing but sleeping, crying, playing Skyrim and going to rehab and therapy. Start of 2021, I went back to school, and slowly recovered. I've been sober since 2020, the paranoia hasn't completely gone away but it's more manageable. I used to think my landlord listened to me through a radon measurement device, and at least that's over, and I think I've got a work-life balance figured out that helps me not overwork myself or go into free time lethargy because I've got too much time off. It was long and painful, but I did it. If you're wondering where my best friend was in all of this, honestly, I don't know. I went back to look at our text messages, and from what I can see he tried to call me a few times in early September. I didn't respond, and then nothing until around Christmas when he wondered if I wanted to meet up sometime. I said yes, and then never followed through. He hasn't texted me since January 4th, 2020. Now, to be clear, I don't blame him for not reaching out more. My non-responding is what killed that friendship. I know, because it also killed every other friendship I had at the time. I don't know, alcohol addiction, deep depression and crippling paranoia, may be a fair explanation to one day stop responding to any of your friends, but I still deeply regret those choices. If I were to make a relationships post today, it would be on how the fuck you word an apology after behavior like that, 5 years down the road. Sorry. I feel like this is starting to become a journal. I'm gonna stop my reflections there. So, about my love for my best friend, with some years of hindsight and therapy behind me, I don't think I was in love with him. I think I was in love with the idea of him, and I think I was obsessed for sure, but looking back, I don't know. I genuinely don't know. I think a part of me really liked the fact that this was a person who so clearly wasn't interested in me. Genuinely, if he was, that would shock me to find out, because he spent 2.5 years ignoring the in hindsight very obvious attempts I made to deepen the relationship. Some examples include, him saying he's waiting for the right person, me responding, sometimes I feel like I already have. Do you ever feel like that? And him going, nah, I don't think so, me following that up with, maybe you just don't know, the heart is weird sometimes. And him going, I'm pretty sure I'd know. One time we talked about why people fall in love and I genuinely tried to convince him a deep friendship was all you needed, while he insisted that there needed to be a level of sexual attraction as well. I tried to get him to do that 36 questions that will make you fall in love thing with me. I kept trying to find excuses to hold his hand. Rest in peace, my palm reading career, you were nothing but a thinly veiled attempt at finger touching, and him resolutely never going along with it. Ditto, but with hugs, arm touching, and sitting just a little too close whenever we went out so I could hear him better, which he normally responded to by going, we should go outside so you can hear better if it's too loud in here. Very thoughtful, but very much not what the goal was. One night, when we were alone in my apartment after a club event, after a particularly long shared look, I asked him what he was thinking about in that kind of, I don't want to break the illusion soft voice you put on when you're really fucking close to someone you like, and his response was, I don't know if I agree that Gertz's metaphor about blinking makes that much sense actually. For context, we'd bickered about that earlier in the night, since we'd just read some article about it in class. I did not expect it to make a comeback at that point. Another night, when we were out together and there had been a lot of looks and closely leaned in laughing together, and he pulls me to one side by the hand to talk to me about something, heart racing, only to ask me if I know if one of my friends is single because he thinks she's really fucking cute and might have been looking at him all night. Looking back, at least some of this stuff is sort of funny. I have no idea if he knew or knows now that I was in love with him. I wouldn't be surprised if some of my old friends eventually told him, but of course he's never reached out about it. But yes, I think I kinda like the security of this person who clearly didn't like me back. Not that I was doing well with the heartache, but there's a certain kind of fucked up comfort that comes from pining for someone who doesn't want you back. Like, the highs I'd get when I got something that felt like confirmation made up for the lows of crying in my apartment stairway when I got home after a denial. Today, I mostly just feel so bad for him and ashamed of myself. Regardless of whether he knew or not, and I'm trying to cling to the fact that he seemed to at least continue wanting to be friends as some indicator that he never felt creeped out or uncomfortable, my behavior was pretty fucking creepy. And in the end, once I did get that distance between us, the feelings went away after some 6 months or so. My therapist recommended not meeting this person again, for my own sake, and by early 2020 I wasn't so painfully in love anymore. A while later I'd end up meeting a guy I clicked with just as much, who actually liked me back and showed it. We've been together for almost 3 years now, and are talking about starting to try for kids at some point soon. He'd like us to get married first, but is also insisting he wants to be the one to propose, so I'm just walking around waiting for the day. Even if it's not a huge surprise or secret, he just wants to get that moment of going down on one knee, and who am I to deny him? I'm slowly growing old and bored. I'm sober, I go to my boring, stable, middle career 9-5 job, I save for my retirement and traveling in the summers, I help my dad out on his farm. I crochet little animals for my newborn niece. I come home to a man who plays his silly video games. I play my silly video games, we go for walks and to the museum and bicker about whether to get fat on takeout or not. I have some regrets about how my early 20s ended up playing out, but by God, I wouldn't want to go back. TLDR, I didn't ask him out. Instead, I had a severe mental health crisis, stopped talking to all my friends, got sober, crawled my way back, and now looking back I'm surprisingly happy with how life turned out. Oh, and I genuinely did not exaggerate those looks, I remember them very clearly and once had a mutual friend comment on it. I still have no idea what was up with those. He doesn't strike me as a person who would try to keep someone on the hook or anything, more like he was just painfully socially oblivious. But I still wonder so much about those goddamn looks, man. Now to the next story 9. Am I the asshole for calling my father's wife a creep after she crossed boundaries with my daughter? Original, my 32F father, 60s, has been married to Sasha. Fake name, 40s, for almost a decade. I was already an adult when they started seeing each other, so I never had much of a relationship with her. That said, Sasha was nice and thoughtful, though a bit annoying at times, and I never had any problems with her. I now have a husband, 34M, and 2 kids, 9M and 4F. Sasha is very fond of my children. Especially my daughter. That became very suffocating pretty quickly, so we started setting some boundaries. She never overstepped them. In January, my father and Sasha decided to go on a trip to Disney World, and invited us to join them. We decided to go to celebrate our son's 9th birthday. I quickly regretted coming along. Sasha spent the entire trip fussing over my daughter in ways that overstepped almost every boundary we'd set. Examples include, Sasha bought a mini ears tiara. She wanted me to buy my daughter an identical one so they could match. My daughter didn't like the tiara, so I bought her a Donald Duck hat instead. Sasha got her the tiara anyway, and was upset that she didn't want to wear it. My father and Sasha went shopping in between parks. I told them not to buy my kids anything, as we still had shopping to do and didn't want to risk making our bags too heavy. Still, Sasha returned with 5 bags of clothing for my daughter, and 2 for my son, saying she couldn't resist it. My daughter wanted a Belle costume to wear at the parks, as that's her favorite princess. Sasha tried to convince us to get her an Ariel costume instead, because that's her favorite. I explained that we never watched The Little Mermaid at home because my daughter is scared of Ursula. Sasha insisted on taking dozens of pictures with my daughter in front of the castle at Magic Kingdom. She also took some with my son, but not nearly as many. She tried to convince us to take our daughter to Bibbidi Bobbidi Boutique. We refused because the prices are crazy and we'd already bought her the Belle costume. She offered to pay, but we held our ground. I later found out Sasha tried to make a reservation anyway, but there was no availability. When we took our daughter to Slinky Dog Dash, her first roller coaster, Sasha tried to sit next to her. My daughter wanted to sit with me, so we switched. She tried to do the same thing in other attractions. At the Muppets Theater, she tried to get my daughter to sit in her lap. Sasha also tried to pick her up while we met some of the characters. There were more instances. The final straw for me, however, was the last park day of the trip. We were at Magic Kingdom. My husband suffered a minor injury and I had to take him to the first aid station. The kids wanted to go to the Peter Pan ride, so my dad and Sasha offered to take them in the meantime. However, according to my father, the line was too long. So instead, Sasha suggested the Little Mermaid ride, assuring my kids Ursula wasn't on it. Actually, there's a pretty big Ursula animatronic there. My daughter was still sobbing and hugging her brother when we reunited. When we flew back home, I told my father that we'd no longer take our children on trips with Sasha due to her behavior. He got extremely angry. He said his wife loved my kids, thought about what they'd like to do at every moment of the trip, and that we should be grateful to have her in our lives. I lost my temper at that. I told him Sasha was a fucking creep, and that they should be grateful I was still okay with them even seeing my children after her actions during the trip. We ended up having a huge fight after that. It's been weeks since we returned home, and my father is still angry at me and my husband. Sasha has texted me a few times. She says she's sorry if she made me uncomfortable, but that she loves my kids and hoped to use the trip to spend more time with them. To be honest, I don't think I'm the here. But I do think I might have overreacted. I believe there's a chance Sasha's actions were motivated by love and she truly did have good intentions. AITA. Update. Hey everyone, I'm ready to give you an update. I read your comments and came to the following conclusion. As much as Sasha's behavior towards my children angered me and freaked me out, calling her a creep was the wrong reaction to have. That said, I think it's best for my family to distance itself from Sasha for the time being. And at the very least, my previous decision to avoid future trips with her based on the Disney trip is still the best course of action. Sasha's pushiness, tendency to override my and my husband's parenting and blatant favoritism towards my daughter were much worse when the kids were younger. After my daughter's birth, she began to focus too much attention on her and almost none on my son. I gave more examples of that in the comments on my original post. That's the reason we set boundaries in the first place. Her fixation on my daughter also bothers me. When we had the boundary conversation with my father and Sasha, she told us that she'd always wondered what having a daughter would be like. She'd also defined herself as child-free before, so I was never certain what to think of that. Either way, that reassured me and my husband that we were doing the best for our kids. Those boundaries had never been overstepped. Then we went on the Disney trip and most of them were completely ignored. Many of you pointed out that she might have gotten carried away, or that Disney is exciting and she wanted to make sure my kids had the best experience, etc. There are two things I'll say to that. The first is that whatever Sasha's reasons were, she still overstepped our boundaries. When we first set those, we told her that doing so would have consequences. Disney or not, I don't see a reason to make an exception. Secondly, she wasn't trying to ensure my kids had the best experience. She was pushing them to fulfill her fantasy of what their Disney trip should look like. She repeatedly ignored my children's wishes in favor of her own, despite them both being very clear about what they wanted and didn't want. Sasha also continually favored my daughter, including during my son's birthday, and fussed over her in ways that made her uncomfortable. And I still haven't forgiven the Little Mermaid thing. My daughter is a bit shy and takes a while to open up to most people, so knowing her trust was broken like that angers me in ways I can't describe. To put it in simpler terms, my children aren't props. And whoever treats them as such will, at the very least, be put in timeout. I called my father and Sasha on Saturday. I apologized for calling Sasha a creep, but told them that we needed some time apart. They won't see my family until my younger sister's birthday in late April. If that goes well, they'll be invited to my daughter's 5th birthday party in May. After that, we'll slowly work on re-establishing contact. I also said that if they overstepped our boundaries again, the consequences would be more dire. My father didn't take it well. I don't care. Sasha sent me a text with more apologies, followed by a request to at least FaceTime my kids every now and then. I said no. And to those who said my controlling behavior ruined the trip, my kids had an amazing time at Disney World. They're both still talking about it. My daughter keeps asking us to put her pictures with the characters she met up on the wall, and my son says he had the best birthday ever. I think that's it. Thank you for your advice and support on my first post. Update 2. Last time I posted here, I mentioned that my father and Sasha wouldn't see my children until my younger sister's birthday. The party took place last weekend, and we didn't attend. These 2 months of NC worked fine, but not great. My father respected my wishes, to my surprise, but Sasha kept trying to find ways to talk to my children. She'd call me under the guise of needing to ask me something, only to later say, "By the way, are the kids around? I want to say hi." Every time she tried that, I'd remind her of what I'd told her back in March. This must have happened almost a dozen times, which was enough for my husband and I to start debating on skipping the party. After speaking to our kids, we decided not to go. They both said they missed my father, but clearly didn't want to see Sasha. We thought about attending and just distancing them from her while there, but risking making our children uncomfortable wasn't worth it. My son even asked if we could see their aunt somewhere else, without Sasha around. My husband and I explained the situation to my sister. She was upset, but mostly because she hadn't seen the kids in a while. We all went to dinner at her favorite restaurant the day after her party. I also called my father and told him we wouldn't go to the birthday party. He reacted better than I expected, but we still had a short fight about it. He claimed that I had promised we'd let Sasha see the kids after 2 months, called me unfair and said he was entitled to have a relationship with his grandchildren. I immediately denied that. Though I tried to sugarcoat it at first, I eventually gave him the truth. My kids don't want to see his wife, and I won't force them to. My father and I had a long talk. I told him how much Sasha's actions at the Disney trip upset my children, as well as how uncomfortable me and my husband felt. I admitted I don't trust his wife at all, and I don't think I ever truly will. He said that while he still thought I was overreacting, he understood I wanted to protect my kids. My dad also told me about how these 2 months of NC were for them. Apparently, Sasha started talking about my kids, mostly my daughter, a lot more than usual. She'd mention things and places she thought they would like. My father was aware of one of the times she called me, but thought it was a one-time thing. She wanted to give my daughter a gift at my sister's birthday party. He said he didn't know why. At one point, she told him she wanted to plan another family vacation with the kids, even though I told them they're not traveling with Sasha anymore. Learning all of that just made me more certain that I can't trust this woman around my children. For now, I intend to remain LC with my father and NC with Sasha. My daughter told me she wanted her grandpa at her birthday party a few weeks from now, so I told him that he was invited, but Sasha wasn't. He agreed. To be honest, I don't trust my father after all of this. I'm allowing him to come because that party will take place at my home, which is easier for me to control. If he tries to bring Sasha, they'll both be kicked out, and it will take a long time for me to consider letting him near my kids again. My father hasn't told me how his wife is reacting to this. My sister told me that during her party, Sasha asked her to tell me she wanted to talk. I'm not reaching out to her, nor do I plan to respond if she attempts to contact me. Both me and my husband have blocked her. My children are doing great. They still talk about how much fun they had at Disney. My daughter's been saving money, putting coins in her piggy bank, for us to go back. On a completely different note, I'm pregnant again. This was completely unplanned. I always said I wanted 2 kids at most, and the third would have to be a huge accident. But my husband and I are ecstatic. I'm still in the first trimester, so not a lot of people know. We're brainstorming ways to tell our kids. Overall, I'm happy with my life right now. And as much as I wish this Sasha situation had never happened, I feel like a better parent after dealing with it. I have never been more confident in my abilities to protect my children than I am now. I don't think I'll update again anytime soon. Once again, thank you for all the support you've given me. I wish you the best. Update 3, September 3, 2024, 7 months later. First of all, my father didn't bring Sasha to my daughter's birthday party back in May. I didn't really think he would. I'd made it very clear I wouldn't tolerate that, but I'd be lying if I said your comments didn't make me a little paranoid. Secondly, I've just entered my 3rd trimester, and the baby will be here in November. The kids are ecstatic. I'm having another girl, but my husband and I are not sharing the sex until she's born. This has nothing to do with our families, it's just something we've also done with our first 2. Everyone, including Sasha, knows I'm pregnant. We announced it a couple months ago. I had no problem with my father telling her, though he did ask if he could. I didn't hear much about her reaction, but according to my father, she was happy for me. My children still don't want to see Sasha, and I'm still not forcing them to. I've unblocked her and put her on mute instead, but she hasn't made any attempts to contact me. We've continued meeting my father without his wife, and I think it's been working out. My relationship with him isn't fantastic, but it's much better than it was earlier this year. Last week, I saw Sasha for the first time in months. My cousin threw a party at her place. My husband and I attended, as did my father and Sasha. I knew she'd be there, but since the kids weren't with us, son had a sleepover, daughter stayed with my mom, I didn't really have anything against seeing her. They arrived sometime after we did. My husband and I spoke with them for a few minutes, and it was less awkward than I expected. Sasha asked me about the baby's sex, and I told her we weren't telling anyone, which, again, is what we've always done. About 20 minutes later, my father told me they had to go. I thought it was weird that they were leaving so soon, but I didn't think much of it at the time. He called me a few days ago and we spoke for a long time. My father is difficult to talk to, so the following is what I gathered from the conversation. He said they left early because Sasha was holding back tears after she saw me. She was sobbing by the time they got to the car. They later had a discussion about it, and Sasha admitted she wanted kids. She married my dad knowing he didn't but hoped he would change his mind. Apparently, when my son was born, Sasha tried to drop "I want one" hints to my father. He didn't notice it, so she gave up. According to my father, Sasha told him she loved my kids equally, but my daughter was special, because she always imagined herself as a girl mom. That's also the reason why she became such a suffocating presence when my daughter was a baby. When my husband and I started setting boundaries, Sasha realized she was overstepping and agreed to abide by them. To her credit, I think she did a mostly okay job back then, but the favoritism was still obvious enough that my son noticed it. The trip we took was a turning point because Sasha's dream of having a daughter included taking her to Disney World and having her do all the things she liked to do there when she was young. She told my father that having my daughter there was so exciting that she forgot everything I'd said about not overstepping. Sasha wanted a mother-daughter trip and tried to use my child for it. Sasha said she regretted her actions during the Disney trip, but only because she lost access to my children due to them. And seeing me at the party, all pregnant and pretty, my father's words, not sure she actually said that, was what drove her over the edge. I remember reading some comments theorizing that this was what was going on, but I still didn't really expect this. My father said he was telling me all this because his wife wasn't doing well, and he'd understand if I wanted to keep my kids away from her. Didn't expect that, either. I don't know what the future of their relationship will be, and I don't think my father does either. All I know is that if Sasha still wants to have kids, it almost definitely will not be with my father. Before all this, I was pondering about my third child's future in relation to Sasha. Now, I sincerely don't want her to be a part of my baby's life. This isn't a final decision, but I've been speaking to my husband about it, and he agrees with me. I don't think she's a bad person. I got some baby stealer comments on my previous update, but I don't think that's what's happening here either. But if the Disney trip proved anything to me, it's that Sasha is willing to be extremely selfish and disrespectful to get what she wants, even when my kids are involved. A couple months ago, my husband and I had a conversation with our son about the subject. He told us he dislikes Sasha for 2 reasons. She favors his sister and she doesn't listen to them. Honestly, that's all I need to know. Looking back at my own childhood, I feel like I was never allowed to have boundaries. I was always expected to put my schedules and preferences aside for others. It's important to me that my children don't go through that. If they don't want to see Sasha, they don't have to. I think that's all I want to say here. I'm doing well. I actually got some great news from work recently. My kids are thriving, and I'm excited to meet my third baby. Again, thank you guys. Update 3, new update. November 23, 2024, 9 months later. I'm happy to announce my daughter was born 2 weeks ago. She arrived a little earlier than expected, but she's perfect. My older kids are in love with their baby sister. And as much as I didn't plan to have a third child, I am truly glad I did. As I mentioned the last time I posted, my husband and I didn't announce the sex in advance when our first 2 kids were born. This time, I decided to give my father a heads up. After I found out about the whole girl mom thing, I became worried about how Sasha would react to the news I was having another daughter. Telling my father ahead of her birth would give him more time to prepare. So about a month ago, my father told Sasha I was having another girl. As expected, she didn't take it well. A few days after I gave birth, my father told me that he and Sasha were separating. They're not sure about divorce, but he thinks that's where they're headed. Sasha started talking to my father about having children around the time I made my last post. According to him, they started fighting about it when she tried to convince him to get his vasectomy reversed. I didn't know he had one. My father said Sasha cried when he told her I'd have another daughter, and they decided to separate a few days later. I'm not very informed about the situation, but my father did state that the decision was mutual. About a week ago, Sasha texted me. It started with her congratulating me for my daughter's birth, then evolved into what seemed like a farewell letter to my children. Not much about them stood out to me, though "you'll never understand the love I feel for your children" was an interesting statement. She talked about how much it hurt to know she'd never meet my baby, or watch my daughter become a big sister. Sasha told me I had tortured her by keeping my kids away, and it was that distance that made her accept she needed to be a mother. She deleted the text a few minutes after I finished reading it. I decided not to reply. I haven't been thinking much about the situation lately, but the more I do, the dumber I feel for not realizing Sasha wanted kids sooner. I remember she started talking about my father's future grandchildren long before I got pregnant with my son. Her behavior around my daughter, at least before the Disney trip, always felt weird to me, but I still never made the connection. I still don't dislike Sasha, but I think she brought this situation upon herself. As much as I recognize my father is far from innocent, he's always been very clear about not wanting more children. Sasha is 47 years old, and while I don't think I'd want to have kids at that age, I know people who have. If that's what she wants, then I wish her luck. We're also officially moving to Europe in 2025. The work-related news I mentioned in my previous update were really, really great. My husband and I had been hoping for an opportunity like this for a while. We're helping the kids make arrangements to maintain contact with their friends. Luckily, my daughter's best friend is my goddaughter. This will be my last update. I'm busy with my baby, and I'll definitely have a busy 2025 as well, so I don't intend to write about this anymore. I want to thank you all for the advice, reassurance and kindness you have shown me. Now to the next story 10. I chose my stepfather to walk me down the aisle, and now my dad is begging for a second chance after seeing the photos. I was escorted down the aisle by my stepfather. After seeing the pictures, my dad broke down in tears and is now pleading for a second ceremony. I got married yesterday. When my dad eventually arrived in the evening after everything was finished, we spoke in a way that brought tears to his eyes. I feel terrible now because of that. To put things in perspective, I became engaged to my fiancée approximately 5 months ago. We chose to get married in our garden with just our loved ones because neither of us wanted a large wedding with lots of guests in a vast location. Our goal was to have a modest, intimate, and private wedding. Since we were getting married on the day of our 4th anniversary, this was a really memorable day for us, who had been together for 4 years. We still had decorators and caterers coming in, so it was obviously not possible to reschedule, despite the little wedding. I was unable to grant my dad's plea to postpone it because of this. I didn't want to because I didn't think it was necessary, more than the fact that I couldn't. My dad wasn't asking me to postpone my wedding because of an urgent matter. My golden child brother was in town and had planned a camping trip for the same weekend, so he wanted me to put it off. I'm not making it up, I promise. This is so ridiculous that I doubt I could ever create it. I couldn't think of a single medical emergency that would require him to wait a week that couldn't be rescheduled. So when my dad called me last week, he said he wouldn't be able to attend my wedding if I held it that weekend because he had a medical emergency. It was a weak excuse. My brother had surprised him with a camping trip, which he had consented to go on, but it happened to fall on my wedding day. I persisted until he finally told the truth. The camping trip was my dad's top priority, but I think it's very clear what the decision should have been. He clarified that he didn't want to miss out on spending time with my brother, who only visits for a few weeks per year. My dad also tried to persuade me that since my wedding wasn't a big occasion, it would be simple to reschedule. He maintained that all I needed to do was talk to the merchants and let a few people know. I made an effort to explain why the wedding date was significant to me, but I soon saw that it was useless. He was going camping with my brother and had already made up his mind. My dad has always given preference to my brother, so I wasn't surprised by this. 3 years older than I am, my brother, 30M, has always been an overachiever. In the meantime, I've been a typical child. Naturally, he received a lot of attention and was constantly complimented, while I frequently felt ignored. He was such a brat with an inflated ego that I was unable to be glad for him. Even though I used to feel jealous of him. He became conceited from all the attention and honestly thought he was a gift from God to humanity. We never got along since he was annoying and behaved like a bully to me. When he left for college, I was relieved. I was in middle school when our parents got divorced. My mom had an affair with one of her college pals, which led to the divorce. My dad agreed to split custody despite the unpleasant divorce that left everyone bitter. The affair was shocking, not the divorce, to be honest. My parents had a constant argument for as long as I can remember. They were never really happy together, even in my fond childhood memories. During family get-togethers or vacations, they simply put on a front for other people. They hardly ever talked or even looked at one another at home. They eventually slept in different rooms. They probably stayed together for the purpose of staying together after falling out of love. My mom had her affair because neither of them tried to make things better. My dad had never been a pleasant man to live with, and I'm not attempting to defend her. Their marriage was going through a particularly difficult period when my mom had an affair. They got into violent arguments nearly every day, and my dad's heavy drinking just made matters worse. My mother eventually came clean about the affair and left the family one day. She still made an effort to communicate with us both, though. My brother entirely disregarded her messages, and I was the only one who replied. She had cheated on our father, and he could never forgive her. My brother's inability to forgive her wasn't shocking. He and my dad have always shared a unique bond. Even though my dad denied it, it was clear from the time we were young that he had a favorite. It was evident from his conduct. My relationship with my father deteriorated as we grew older. My dad appeared to be upset with me after the divorce when I made the decision to keep up a friendly connection with my mom and stepdad. He became aloof. He probably wanted me to behave like my brother, who was often disparaging our mother and her new husband. A few months after the divorce was finalized, my mom got married again, and I was a bridesmaid at her wedding. My brother declined to go. My brother was forced to spend half the month with my mother because she had partial custody, regardless of his sentiments. My brother didn't like that my mother didn't play favorites, therefore those weeks were unbearable. He was unable to escape punishment for his misbehavior at her home. My dad made multiple attempts to request full custody, alleging that my mom and her spouse were abusing my brother. He failed because his claims were unfounded. Looking back, I'm happy. I only had one parent who truly cared about me, my mother. I didn't despise my stepfather. He was a good man as well. I had mixed feelings toward my mother as a child. I wasn't sure if I should forgive her for cheating on my dad. I ultimately made the decision to follow my happiness. I put money into maintaining a positive relationship with my mother because it made me feel at ease. I'm glad I did. 6 years ago she passed away from cancer. What mattered was that she was always a good mother to me, regardless of the events in her marriage. My brother was scarce, even in her last days. Before she passed away he did pay her a few visits, which gave her some serenity. My stepdad moved out of state when she passed away, but we continued to communicate. The repercussions of my mother's death. My brother acquired a job in London and moved there around a year after my mother's death. Now he comes to see our dad once a year. I don't talk to my brother anymore. However, my connection with my dad started to become better once my brother moved out and my mom passed away. After finding out about my mom's infidelity, he expressed regret for his lack of warmth for me. He acknowledged that he had acted in ways he wasn't proud of, particularly toward me, since he felt deceived and hurt. He tried to improve our relationship and admitted that he had always given my brother more attention. We've become closer over the last few years, which I never imagined was possible. I asked him to lead me down the aisle at my wedding because I thought things had improved. He concurred. As long as he showed me love and respect, I didn't mind that he was still very close to my brother. The ultimate camping trip. But recent events made it clear to me that as long as my brother was alive, I would never really be a priority. I came to see that my brother's relocation away was the only reason my dad even made an effort to patch things up between us. I become less important when my brother is around. It was a terrible wake-up call when my dad asked me to reschedule my wedding so that I could go camping with my brother. The realization that things hadn't altered as much as I had thought was painful. I made a snap decision in the heat of the moment. I consented to postpone my wedding. I called my stepdad a few minutes after I hung up with my dad. I invited him to lead me down the aisle without thinking twice. I'll admit that what I did at the time was spiteful and motivated by retaliation. But I believed that I was being good for myself by reprimanding my father. I didn't mind my stepdad filling in because he was already invited as a guest to the wedding and he's always been a good man. Even though we don't communicate often, we are still close because he helped me get through my mother's burial. He was first hesitant to accompany me down the aisle as he knew my father was also invited. Nevertheless, I persuaded him and he accepted. I felt justified, so I didn't think about it too much. My fiancé's encouragement provided me with the necessary validation. My annoyance was exacerbated by the fact that my dad had hardly communicated with me during the preceding week, perhaps because my brother was back in town. As anticipated, my dad did not attend my wedding yesterday. I waited until the very last minute in the hopes that he would surprise me. However, he didn't. For the most part, I was content as my stepdad led me down the aisle. After all, it was my wedding day. Later, when I emailed my dad a picture of my stepdad escorting me down the aisle, that was the only hitch. I assumed he would be upset. I was surprised when he decided to confront me on the following bus back to town. My father and brother showed up that night as the visitors were departing. They appeared worn out, but my dad said the most. He urged me to have another ceremony so he could lead me down the aisle and expressed regret for not taking my wedding seriously. He acknowledged that I was justified in my conduct and that it was rude to ask me to reschedule for a camping trip. All he wanted was another opportunity, and he regretted everything. He even declared that he only wanted the joy of seeing his daughter go down the aisle and didn't care if no one else showed there. I was offended by his desperation. It became evident that his activities were motivated more by a desire to outdo my stepdad than by a genuine concern for me. I asked him if, had my stepdad not escorted me down the aisle, he would have responded in the same manner. His reluctance was sufficient enough. I informed him that he had let me down and that I would not be getting married again merely to please him. He blew the opportunity he had. He started crying and pleading for forgiveness when I ordered him to leave. He stated that he regretted everything after seeing the photos and that he had not known I was serious about holding the wedding. He adamantly apologized for not putting me first. He accused me of being callous and overreacting to a single error when I asked him to go once more. The final straw was that. I informed him that I had every right to defend myself at this point if he could treat me badly for the rest of my life without good cause. I reminded him that his actions were the reason behind everything that was happening to him. Unlike him, my stepdad truly cared about me, so I told him I was happy he escorted me down the aisle. Then I left him crying and went back inside. My brother and father were gone when I looked out a while later. Considering I regret what I said now that some time has gone by. Knowing I brought him to tears makes me feel worse. I question whether asking my stepdad to escort me down the aisle and then putting it in my dad's face was too harsh. Revise: I've come to the conclusion that I don't need to apologize after giving it some serious thought. My dad decided to put a camping trip ahead of my wedding. I've been defending his actions my entire life, and I'm sick of it. My dad's actions have no justification, and I am free to choose not to forgive him. I'm sorry for bringing him to tears, but a person can only take so much abuse. Beyond that, I think it's okay to defend your rights, even if doing so causes harm to the other person. I cried a lot during my early and adolescent years due to my dad's treatment of me. I never showed anyone how much it hurt me, not even him. I don't think he would have changed even if he had known. I'm happy that I didn't get in touch with him once more. My husband supports me and says it's the appropriate decision after we chatted about it. He wanted this decision to be mine alone, which is why he didn't voice his opinion sooner. I also expressed my guilt to my stepfather for becoming involved in my problems with my father. I even said I was sorry for using him as a means of retaliation. He assured me, though, that it didn't concern him. He knows how much I cherish him, and he felt gratified that I considered him first. My guilt was lessened by his comprehension, and I'm happy he doesn't take offense. I think it's obvious now to everyone who was upset with me for bringing up my stepdad. He doesn't mind. I don't mind my choice as long as he's cool with it. Drama after the wedding. Since the wedding a few days ago, my dad has been phoning and texting me daily. I don't want to hear what he has to say, therefore I haven't even opened or replied to his messages. I've made the decision to put my attention on my upcoming honeymoon with my spouse rather than this issue. First update. My dad called again this morning. I chose to read his messages for the first time even though I didn't answer. They were all apologies, as one might anticipate. He agreed that I had every right to be angry. Said he hadn't been a good father, and begged for another opportunity to make things right. He acknowledged his prejudice against my brother and vowed to make every effort to mend our friendship. I felt depressed after reading those messages. The entire scenario is quite distressing. But I've decided that I need space. I contacted him back to establish boundaries after reading the messages. I requested that he refrain from contacting me for a time because I was going on my honeymoon. Repeated apologies just serve to prolong the suffering. They won't alter the past. I made it obvious that I needed him to honor my wishes, but I also vowed to get in touch when I was ready. I understand, he said, adding that he would wait for me to get in touch with him. Second update. As I enter the third day of my honeymoon, my father has not gotten in touch with me. But my brother contacted me out of the blue today, and it was totally unnecessary. I didn't recognize the number since he was using a burner phone. I was going to hang up when I heard his voice and responded, but he baited me by calling me an escapist. Sadly, it was successful because he is skilled at making me feel uncomfortable. My brother gave me a lecture on the value of family, saying I should apologize for the terrible way I was treating our dad. Additionally, he bemoaned how uncomfortable my dad was and how I had ruined his visit by cutting short their camping trip. He went on to accuse me of being envious of him, saying that my behavior was motivated by resentment because my father put him before me. He further claimed that by continuing to see our mother during the divorce, I betrayed my father. His childishness astounded me, but I wasn't shocked. I informed him that a man-child like him would act in this way. I explained that I actually felt sorry for him and wasn't at all envious of him. My sibling is still emotionally stunted despite having a successful profession. Whatever he accomplishes, he will always be unhappy and unlikable. I interrupted him when he attempted to argue with me, stating that it would only serve to highlight his desperate attempt to hide his discontent. I ended the phone before he could say anything else. Even though I know I shouldn't have talked to him at all, it was rewarding in its own right. I made the decision to only take calls in an emergency from that point on for the remainder of my trip. Update 4. Talking to my dad. A few days ago, I came home from my honeymoon. After a while of staying in holiday mode, my husband and I decided it was time to return to our regular life and our jobs. I made the decision to face my father yesterday. I went to his residence after work. Naturally, my brother was also present and he appeared astonished to see me. Since I don't care about him, I gave him my full attention. I didn't want to have any serious conversations with my brother, so I asked to talk to my dad alone. I was certain that he would be unable to be silent and would continuously interrupt, and I couldn't stand it. My dad and I were finally alone when my brother left the room, albeit he appeared to be upset about it. When we were alone, I expressed my disappointment in my father's actions. I reminded him that I had asked him to lead me down the aisle because I felt our relationship had improved over the previous few years. But it became evident what his priorities were when he requested me to reschedule the wedding. My stepdad is significant to me in his own right, but I acknowledged that asking him to lead me down the aisle was selfish and vengeful of me. I informed my dad that I still didn't know if he had come that day because he truly regretted missing my wedding or because he felt competitive with my stepdad. In any case, it was no longer relevant. We cannot undo the past. What has been done is done. A way forward for reconciliation. He initially appeared to be very distraught, but I assured him that starting over was the only way to move on. I am aware that a lot of people would anticipate that I would completely cut him out of my life, but in all honesty, I don't want to or can live with that. I know how quickly life can take individuals away because I lost my mother to cancer. I can't ignore the positive times I've had with my father, even with all the negative ones. But I also can't deny the pain he's given me. I clarified that I had reached a point of acceptance. I'm willing to give him another chance to make amends for his mistakes from now on. I urged him to allow me that space though, because I need time to recover. We can attempt to mend our father-daughter relationship when I feel ready, which could take weeks, months, or even years. I wish to avoid touch till then. I asked him if he could accept this and he nodded. Before I left, he asked if he may give me a hug. It was emotional when we hugged, but I held back from crying until I was back in my car. In conclusion, we decided on that, and I believe it works, at least for the time being. The course of events will become clear with time. I'm comfortable with the situation for the time being. Now to the next story 10. My parents made me the other kid. While my sister became their golden child and destroyed my life. I can't make my update without it, so I'm reposting it. Except for this caption, nothing has changed. It's just as it was before the moderators of the entitled parents took it down. After reading a similar experience online, I felt compelled to share my own. I'm publishing this as my one and only Reddit post since I felt that sharing it might make me feel a little better. I've had some counseling, and discussing this topic in particular was quite beneficial. Why not just share it online as well, I reasoned. This year, I turned 18, and I recently moved out on my own, away from my parents. My sister is roughly 10 years my junior. She almost didn't make it to term because her pregnancy wasn't intended. Since I was never given much information, I don't know many specifics about how difficult my mother's second pregnancy was, but I do know that it was extremely taxing on her body, as my sister's birth prevented her from having any more children. That year, she spent a lot of time in and out of the hospital. My mother also nearly died during the birth. Because my younger sister might not have been born, it caused her and my father to get attached to her. With the exception of times when they needed a free babysitter, I felt like the other kid in the house ever since. My parents' long-term favoritism has led me to believe that they were truly insane for failing to recognize the precise harm it was causing to me. And now, starting with my 11th birthday, I'll describe how it's rebounding on them. My sister was 2 years old when she wept upon seeing a birthday cake that wasn't hers, therefore my parents asked me to let her blow out my candles. My parents had me do it even though I didn't want to. The moment felt totally wrecked, but they relit the candles so I could do it again later. The following year, the year after that, and so on, all experienced the same thing. They simply persisted in enforcing it until it was standard. My birthdays also had to include gifts for my sister. Hers never had any on mine. They simply said that I'm a boy and boys don't need to worry about it as much, when I questioned why. I understand that I was a child, but did they truly believe that what I said was wise? Not at all. Every time I had a birthday, my parents would pick a location that my sister preferred above mine. After a while, it seemed more like I had no birthdays while my sister had two. Beyond this, my sister became the center of my parents' entire existence. My sister had to agree with me if I wanted to do something. Otherwise, it was vetoed unless I could complete it by myself. Video games didn't seem to bother me there, until my sister wanted to come in and irritate me, so I learned to just lock myself in my room with them. That's why I locked the door. I was an irate teenager who was sick of being interrupted at any time, so when my parents asked me to take it off, I freaked out. My parents were mad at me for being nude in my own room, and my sister repeatedly ran in when I was naked. They retracted their objection and simply let me keep the lock after I pointed out how ridiculous it was. Because she was being pampered every day, my sister developed a princess complex. I avoided her as much as possible since she was highly demanding. I used every justification I could find to avoid dealing with her, even if it meant making things up, in order to have some alone time. I had more alone time once my parents hired a teenage girl to watch me. After my sister refused to listen to her, the babysitter quit, and my parents attempted to avoid paying her by saying she did a poor job. After the girl enlisted the help of others, my parents ultimately gave her the money she was due. After that, they recruited a second girl to watch the kids on a regular basis, and she stayed. I went out of my way to keep myself occupied with my part-time job whenever I could, but my parents still made it obvious that I was expected to care for my sister on any day I had free time. My sister gave me directions and treated me like her own butler. She would not quit using her ridiculous moniker for me. The mere mention of that moniker gets me furious. She would call our parents and cry if I didn't give her whatever she wanted, and I would then face consequences for mistreating her. This led to a lot of heated disputes between us, and once I refused to give in anymore, my relationship with my parents deteriorated to the point that we hardly spoke to each other for a while. However, they had the audacity to boast to other parents that they were the reason I put in so much effort during my high school graduation. Although they weren't incorrect, the explanation they were considering wasn't the one that actually occurred. I put a lot of effort into waiting to be free. However, my parents pretended to have accomplished a lot. Perhaps they did, prior to the birth of my sister. After that, though, it was all about her. Unless parent-teacher conferences were approaching, they didn't even inquire about my schooling. I received a B and C average when I graduated. Even though the trip was supposed to be for me, my sister always had more fun than I did when my parents took me there after I graduated. However, everything really came to a head in July, when I turned 18. Despite the fact that it was my 18th birthday, it didn't seem to be about me. I fervently hoped that, for once, we would be dining at my favorite restaurant. Instead, they had the celebration at Chuck E. Cheese, a local copycat. It became the go-to location for anything big because it was the only one like it in the area. Kids half my age were having their celebrations all around me. I had nothing to do but eat terrible pizza and play outdated arcade games and claw machines for tickets to insignificantly expensive prizes since I was so bored. My parents then produced a pink cake with white flowers on it when it was time for cake. It was clearly not a boy cake, even though it bore my name. There were only 10 candles, which was worse. In front of my sister, my parents blew out the candles and placed the cake. That's when it happened at last. I suddenly experienced a mental flashback of all the repressed annoyance. I then broke down in tears. I was crying in front of the entire family as an 18-year-old boy. Time appeared to stop because everyone was so shocked. All of the things I had been suppressing for the last 8 years just poured out like word vomit when I woke up. The whole family was able to see it. I went outside to sit beside the family car after I was finished. My parents kept the pink cake covered until it was served, so many relatives followed me to apologize and explain that they were unaware of it. The fact that they were unaware didn't matter, I said. For the past 8 years, Little Miss Sunshine had dominated my life while they all looked on. My celebrations and birthdays were all about her, so I didn't really have any of my own. Then, on the most important birthday of my life, they all expected me to simply nod and smile as usual while they gave my sister a cake that was specifically for her, even though it wasn't her birthday. Some of them began apologizing to me, but they gave explanations, claiming that they simply assumed I was fine with it since my parents had told me so. I informed them that I would never tolerate it. I just pretended to accept it after my parents made me do it every year. I instructed them to glance around as I spread my arms. Did this seem like the location I had in mind for my 18th birthday and graduation celebration? All this time, nobody even made an effort to defend me. My sister had it all, and I was just the other kid. My parents stopped allowing me to invite my friends long ago after they attempted to express their disapproval of my sister blowing out my candles, so I never even got to have them there. Was wanting a year that was about me and not her really that bad? There are 365 days in a year. Instead, because I want my own birthday, I'm treated like the entitled, avaricious brat that I am. I resumed my nasty crying. By then, my mother was sobbing too, so my father rushed outside to scold me for creating such a big spectacle. Everyone in the room now believes they are awful parents because I destroyed my sister's moment. I shouted back at him that he should understand why they are bad parents. The rest of the family surrounded him like a swarm of wolves when I said that. I had never seen anything like it before, but I guess it was better late than never. The majority of the throng rushed back inside with my father to argue with my mother after he was virtually backed up to the restaurant's front entrance. My grandparents stayed with me and expressed regret for spending so much time with their eyes closed. I'm not sure what was said to my parents in the restaurant, but they didn't return for around 30 minutes. They appeared completely defeated when they did. Both of my parents were unable to look me in the eyes, and my mother was still sniffling after sobbing so much. Both of them made clumsy excuses for their actions and promised to have the party somewhere else. However, the crowd didn't find it to be sufficient. My parents emphasized that they would never force me to let my sister blow out my candles again, give her gifts on my birthday, or make it about her in any way. One of my uncles cleared his throat pretty loudly. In addition to apologizing for bringing me a cake that was clearly not intended for me, there was another loud cough. They claimed they believed that at my age, cake was no longer a concern for me. Whoa, that was a terrible thing to say. I lost my temper again and screamed at them that it didn't matter how old I was. For years, they had given my sister my birthday without any justification, and they were aware of it. I informed them that since it was too late, there was no need in having the party again. They had made it quite evident that they didn't care about me. I brought up the fact that they had destroyed 8 years of my life before I reached adulthood. What birthdays with them would I be able to anticipate in the future? My father became upset with me for saying so, but he stopped talking after the whole family yelled at him. My grandfather informed him that I was entirely correct and that the harm could not be reversed. He claimed that ever since my sister was born, my parents were terrible individuals who took advantage of me and treated me like a black sheep. Furthermore, he claimed that they were all terrible because they simply allowed it to occur. He went on to say that I owed my life back, not just an apology. I resisted her attempts to approach me as she sobbed my name and apologized, but my mother broke down once more. She was body blocked from approaching half of the household. I just remarked that I was at my breaking point and turned to go. I was found and brought back by one of my aunts. I was so angry that I couldn't even be happy for any justice after all this time, even though I could hear several family members screaming and swearing at my parents over what had transpired. And throughout all of this, where was my sister? She was still eating cake and tearing apart gifts that were intended for me alone in the restaurant. In case anyone was curious, when I sobbed and left, my parents did offer her some cake. They were later called out on it, even though you would assume it wouldn't be their main concern right now. As everyone else left the party, my grandparents persuaded me to settle down and take a seat in their vintage minivan. When my sister was discovered to be opening my gifts, she pitched a fit. One of those gifts was a brand new smartphone, which she was not permitted to retain, so she hurled it against the wall and destroyed it. A few months prior, on her own birthday, she had received a brand new phone. In the end, I became so angry that I ranted about never wanting to have another birthday party. I was allowed to spend the night at my grandparents' place. I still hadn't spoken to my folks when I got home. My father remained as silent as I did, and my mother simply kept crying because I wouldn't talk to her. My grandparents persuaded me to join them for dinner the next weekend. I was shocked to discover a completely different party waiting for me when we arrived. Almost the whole time, my parents were there, grinning awkwardly and saying, "Don't hate us." A large chocolate cake with 18 candles and even a banner with my name on it was present. Since I didn't actually get to celebrate either this year, they dubbed it my happy belated birthday and graduation party. I had to act like I was delighted. 8 years of partiality cannot be reversed or even somewhat impacted by a one nice party. What happened to my sister? It wasn't all about her like it used to be, so she was sitting at the table with her arms folded and her lip twisted. The family sang me a modified version of Happy Day instead of Happy Birthday. My sister let out an ear-piercing scream as soon as I extinguished the candles. My parents, appearing more distressed than ever, had to take her out quickly and return her later. For the remainder of the celebration, she sulked in silence in her seat. My sister was punished for her actions at the last party by having her smartphone taken away, while I was still given a new one. However, there were other gifts besides the smartphone. My entire family helped out and bought me a car. Even though it was only an old white Volvo, I fell in love with it right away. My grandfather, who had some automotive knowledge, had fixed it himself. My sister was obviously not as delighted as I was. She threw a fit and demanded a car as well, letting out another one of those yells. It took some time for them to return outside after my mother had to take her to the restroom. My father simply returned to his dejected appearance. Their attempt to appear respectable in front of the entire family had been essentially wrecked by my sister. My sister was acting that way because my parents brought her up to be a pampered, entitled princess, according to several family members who also had harsh things to say about them. I immediately began driving the automobile around, but a few days later, my sister damaged it by smashing two side windows with a hammer and severely damaging the windshield, rendering the vehicle unusable. She screamed bloody murder as my parents grabbed her and removed the hammer, but they were able to stop her before she could do further harm. She even made an attempt to bite them. My grandfather had worked so hard on that car that everyone, especially my grandparents, was upset with my sister. It was destroyed by my sister's outburst. My sister was so indulged by my grandparents, they acknowledged, that she was unable to process the notion that I could have something that she was not able to. My sister was being raised to be an entitled brat by my parents, who were criticized by a number of other family members for setting her up for failure. They said that because my parents wouldn't enforce their rules and instill respect in her, my sister would have a horrible adult life. She was not unpunished for her acts. My sister was sent to boarding school at the beginning of the new school year after being grounded for the remainder of the summer. My father maintained that it was the only way to begin repairing the harm they had caused, despite my mother's tears. Yes, they admitted their mistakes wholeheartedly. Since no one took their side, it was difficult for them to hide it. At the boarding school, my sister is very miserable. She has been lying nearly non-stop and despises the rules and the outfits. But now that there are cameras everywhere, she can't get away with any of it. She yelled at our parents for placing her in that situation despite their repeated attempts to visit her. I've heard that she might live like this until she turns 18. My car's repairs were covered by my parents. The windshield and windows were replaced by an auto glass firm, and the vehicle now has the same appearance as before. My granddad approached me in August about a job possibility with a friend, but it was 40 minutes away. Unless I liked the lengthy journey, I would have to leave my parents' house. I was all for relocating. It was difficult for me to find my first flat. To get a studio, I had to have my credit card approved, but I was able to do it. Since September, I have been residing here. I don't talk to my parents very much, yet they keep trying to reach me. When we do speak, I always feel uncomfortable and uneasy. According to my grandfather, my parents are attempting to get in touch with me because they are unable to cope with their parental failures. He believes that in order for them to feel better about themselves, they want me to forgive them. However, I will not be forgiving them anytime soon. At last, I'm content and no longer with them. Now they have nothing. Not only do they lack my sister, they also lack me. The cost of my sister's boarding school, in addition to the party they held for me and the repairs they made to my car, forced my parents to work longer hours. All they have left is their job to concentrate on, an empty house, and irate relatives. Although I don't enjoy their suffering, it is ultimately the consequence of their own deeds. Edit. I want to express my gratitude to everyone who has given me awards. It holds great significance for me. Despite the fact that my piece was lengthy, I felt a great sense of relief after finishing it. In the comments, I saw some people accusing this post of being phony. I don't hold anything against you. If I were reading this, I would also be quite skeptical. I did, however, live it. That is the reality for some parents. People who had comparable or worse circumstances have even gotten in touch with me. Is it truly so strange that my parents behaved in this manner, given the abundance of horrible parents in the world? I come from a close-knit family where we stick together and do things as a group, so it may sound extreme for the entire family to rush back into the restaurant to confront my dad. At gatherings, it can quickly become the whole group versus one individual. I've witnessed it previously, such as when a cousin who was intoxicated was surrounded and taken away from a gathering to become sober. Although I really dislike collective mentalities, they were helpful in this situation. Words cannot express how ashamed my parents were of what they had done. They were unable to come up with a suitable explanation for their actions without coming across as even worse. They have essentially given up, acknowledging that they have no justification and are making a concerted effort to win my favor. I believe that a large portion of my relatives' assistance was motivated by shame, even though many of you are thanking them for it. With the exception of 2 years during COVID, the majority of them attended those 8 birthdays, but they kept quiet. When my sister blew out my candles, they may have given me a critical look, but they remained silent. Why? My grandfather, the patriarch of the family, is the father of my father. My grandfather can be rather frightening. He will assist you in whatever way he can if you're on his good side. The whole family despises you if you're on his bad side. That's a major factor in my distaste for group mentalities. My grandfather felt embarrassed when he remarked that the whole family was to blame for not supporting me throughout those years. They all contributed to the price of my vehicle. They didn't need to make a significant individual contribution because they had so many relatives. Even the receipt from the time I registered the vehicle in my name is with me. They paid $2,000 for it, plus additional money for tires and parts. My granddad adjusted the fluids and tuned it himself. The interior was thoroughly cleaned by my grandmother. Even though I'm incredibly grateful to each of them, I still wish to keep my distance. To figure things out on my own, I need time. It is likely that I will not see my parents again until Christmas or Thanksgiving. My sister has been likened by some to South Park's Eric Cartman, and it's a fairly accurate comparison. Because my parents gave her a lot of junk food, she is overweight. She despises eating anything nutritious. She once topped mashed potatoes with gummy bears, as I witnessed. I feel sick just thinking about that combination. She also spent a lot of time in the restroom as a result of her bad diet. In order to assist, my parents had to purchase fiber snacks, which I don't believe were inexpensive. My sister always believed she was in charge and is also very bossy. She was always giving me directions, so I would frequently lock myself in my room to avoid her. Because she was so domineering, she lost a lot of friends, but my parents assured her that the youngsters were envious of her uniqueness. When things didn't go her way, my sister would even call herself a princess and have big tantrums. Although I'm aware that she is more than a caricature, her actions definitely remind me of Eric Cartman. I am aware that my sister is also not a moron. She simply doesn't put out any effort and only received a C average in school. She would most likely receive straight A's a student if she put in the necessary effort. Second edit. It appears that the subreddit has banned me. I'm not sure what I did, perhaps the post was too lengthy. In any case, I am no longer able to respond to comments, but I would want to thank everyone who left encouraging words. Thank you everyone from the bottom of my heart. Update. Here is what has transpired since my parents began celebrating my sister's birthday 8 years ago, for anyone who are curious. It has now been almost a year. I thought I was done here, so I didn't log in for a while. However, one day I decided to check in again and saw a ton of private messages requesting updates. The majority of what I'm going to share with you is based on what my parents and grandparents told me. I'm recounting what I discovered, so don't worry if it seems too bizarre. Yes, I'm doing great, but my parents and younger sister aren't doing so well. My sister made a number of attempts to leave boarding school after I last posted. She tried doing nothing, but it didn't help her. And none of her plots or falsehoods succeeded. She then tried going on a hunger strike, not eating anything until our parents arrived to get her up. My father prevented my mother from jumping into the automobile to save her baby, reminding her that they were to blame for my sister's actions. After fewer than 2 days of her hunger strike, my sister started to seek food in the cafeteria. Snacks and sweets were strictly prohibited at school unless they were nutritious. My parents had received a warning from a pediatrician that unless my sister's nutrition improved, she could develop diabetes in the future and possibly experience stunted growth. Gummy bears on mashed potatoes are out. My sister attempted to bully the other girls at the boarding school, of course, but they didn't put up with her bullshit. She got into a quarrel one day and was attacked by many girls who kicked her until a teacher intervened. My sister was scraped and bruised all over, but she wasn't terribly hurt. She blamed everyone else, of course, and said the other girls should follow her instructions. It should come as no surprise that her peers avoided her. She couldn't understand not getting her way, so she threw a fit. My sister was busted when my mother attempted to sneak junk food to her at the boarding school. My parents got into a heated argument as a result. Although my sister still craves junk food, my mother stopped smuggling it after being caught. My sister eventually turned to self-harm as her schemes became more complex in an attempt to influence her way out of the school. Unbeknownst to her, she stole a knife from the cafeteria and stood on a table, threatening to leave without chocolates. Candy indeed. She broke her left arm, her clavicle, and suffered a concussion when she slid and tumbled off the table during a chaotic time. Even the boarding school didn't want her back at that point. She was admitted to a children's mental health facility after leaving the hospital. She is currently receiving treatment for extreme narcissism, which my parents really encouraged. Unless my parents take her out, she is unable to leave the ward. There, she continues her education and follows a rigorous, healthful diet that she hates. It is personal agony for my sister. My father and I got into yet another heated argument when my mother sought to remove her from the ward. My mother took a bottle off the counter during the dispute and struck him with it, severely slashing his face and shattering his cheekbone. After the police were summoned, my mother was driven away in a police car and my father was brought to the hospital. After that, She spent several months in a mental health facility where she was compelled to face her enabling tendencies and trauma. I don't know the details, but from what I've learned, my mother's behavior is a result of unresolved issues from her own upbringing. My parents are now merely sleeping in different bedrooms, though there has been discussion of a divorce. Regarding myself, I recently turned 19. At a restaurant I enjoy, my grandparents hosted a celebration for me. Although my sister was temporarily permitted to leave the ward for the event, my parents and sister were present. She sat there looking at me like she hoped I would burn, her lip twisted. Because of her forced healthy diet, she had lost weight, but her resentment had not gone away. This time, she didn't scream as I extinguished my candles. Rather, she started sobbing uncontrollably while repeatedly asking why. It was merely another attempt at manipulation. Eventually, she pitched a fit, screaming that there was nothing. No pizza, no presents for her, no prizes. She then began to curse at our parents and made an attempt to leave the restaurant. She was clearly attempting to emulate my actions during my 18th birthday celebration, but it was just another example of her incapacity to acknowledge that not everything is about her. In a twisted manner, she was essentially attempting to replicate what I had done the previous year. I know my sister, even though you might think I'm overanalyzing this. She will take action if she believes it would help her achieve her goals. My grandfather spoke to my parents before they brought my sister home early after apologizing to everyone. My grandmother later provided me with some information. According to my grandfather, my parents had better not give in to my sister's requests or host her own party. He cautioned them that unless they permanently stopped supporting her, this conduct would never stop. After hearing this, my sister recognized that her outbursts were no longer effective. The following morning, she was driven back to the ward after being escorted out of the restaurant while kicking and crying. She is currently there. I'm not sure how long she'll be there. Even though she is only a child, she is the most obstinate person I have ever encountered. Until she reaches her lowest point, I don't think she will change. She's trapped in a situation that doesn't allow her to make demands until then. Not even my parents have attempted to hold me responsible for my sister's behavior during the previous 12 months. They've got to acknowledge that they brought her up to be a narcissist and that I had nothing to do with this. I've discovered that supporting a narcissist is a type of addiction. The only mental disorder my sister has been diagnosed with is narcissism, which she inherited from her upbringing. She has an IQ of about 110, which makes her somewhat smarter than me, but she only works hard when she receives a reward. She was conditioned to think that way, and I think it will take years to change. Regarding myself, I'm succeeding on my own. Although it's difficult, I've had to learn how to manage my finances and take care of myself, but it's still far better than living with my sister and parents. Edit. Someone pointed out that it doesn't make sense for my sister to be in a long-term facility for narcissism alone. It usually wouldn't, I agree. I'm being kept in the dark about any more diagnoses. I can sense that my parents aren't telling me everything, and since I'm not her parent, I can't just question the doctors. Nevertheless, when she doesn't get her way, my sister can be incredibly harmful to herself. It wasn't the only time she threatened herself at the boarding school with a knife. She has used similar threats to control my parents ever since she was admitted to the ward. For instance, she threatened to hurt herself if they didn't take her out for fast food after my 19th birthday. She frequently hits her head against the wall as a strategy. My mother didn't want to report this to the ward, but my father did. My sister has also made up claims of being harmed by doctors, but they never add together. Another element in her situation may be pathological lying, which is probably a major reason she is in a long-term facility. The cycle would repeat if my parents gave in to her demands once more if she were at home. I believe Little Miss Sunshine is relying on it. Third update. My knowledge of Little Miss Sunshine has increased. First of all, I acknowledge that I erred in some of my previous writings, including misrepresenting her age and other specifics. Anyone in my family who reads this would recognize me, even though I'm terrible at arithmetic and frequently try to hide facts to remain anonymous. To be clear, my sister blew out my birthday candles for the first time when she was 3 years old, and I was 8 when she was born. I was bitter as my parents began honoring her on my birthdays from the very beginning. By the time I turned 11, everything revolved around her, presents bearing her name, places she enjoyed, and her assisting me in unwrapping my gifts. Even if my parents acknowledged their mistakes, the years they stole from me still remain. Concerning the diagnosis of my sister, although a person cannot be officially diagnosed with narcissism until they are 18, my father acknowledged that she exhibits symptoms of potential NPD and other disorders. Due to the experiences she experienced as a youngster, my mother was also diagnosed with PTSD and another mental illness. Since my sister is their problem, not mine, my father advised me to overlook the fact that my parents have kept many details ambiguous. One of the most sensible things he has ever said to me is that the present condition of Little Miss Sunshine. She has no definite release date and is still in the ward. Although some of her anger has been tamed by therapy, she still feels entitled to all I own. She even demanded her own apartment during outbursts regarding mine. She has also continued to think that my birthday is hers. She was brought up that way, and my parents are solely to blame. They have requested me to keep quiet about the matter, stating that there is no assurance she will recover and that years of therapy will be necessary. In addition to taking medicine and attending treatment, my mother has become lethargic. She was temporarily committed for beating my father, but for some reason, she kept her job. Her employer let her to work from home for a lower salary. My viewpoint, since my actual birth date is eternally marred, I have made the decision to celebrate my birthday on the day of my belated celebration going forward. Returning to Reddit has caused me stress, even though I thought I was doing okay. My supervisor sent me home for the day because I'm so irritable and cynical. To deal with this, I'm thinking of looking for free counseling or local support groups. I am grateful to everyone who has read and comprehends my suffering. Although you have shown me kindness, I must concentrate on moving past my past. I may never come back here or respond to comments. Last edit, I discovered that I had committed math mistakes once more after reading my post again. My supervisor told me to take a sick day because I've been such a mess. Stress even made me throw up. Another post I came across showed parents chopping up their older child's personalized birthday cake for their golden child. This and other posts like it made me realize how many parents are just like me, changing only after embarrassment but remaining the same on a deep level. I'm cutting off communication with my parents and will talk to my grandparents about it more. I might not make another post here. I'd like to thank everyone who helped me.
Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.